19 years ago, they threw my garbage bags onto the driveway in the middle of a thunderstorm, calling my unborn baby a mistake that would ruin their pristine country club reputation. Tonight, they barged into the most exclusive dining room in Atlanta, demanding to see the grandson they abandoned. But the woman who stepped out of the kitchen to meet them was not the helpless, terrified teenager they remembered. My name is Jada. I am 35 years old, and I spent the last 2 decades turning my heartbreak into an empire. I was standing at the stainless steel prep station, wiping the rich scent of black truffle oil and roasted garlic from my hands onto my crisp white chef coat. The rhythmic chaos of the kitchen was my sanctuary. The hiss of searing Wagyu beef, the sharp calls of ticket orders, and the intense heat of the line were all elements I controlled with absolute precision. Then my floor manager burst through the swinging doors looking pale and frantic. The ambient noise of my flagship restaurant aura seemed to fade as he rushed over to me. He said there was a massive disturbance at the host stand. A group of 4 people had pushed past the velvet rope and were shouting at the hostess, refusing to leave until they saw the kitchen staff. Before I tell you what happened when I walked out of those doors, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to build your own table after the people who were supposed to love you refused to give you a seat. This story is a testament to the fact that the best revenge is massive silent success. I pushed through the heavy wooden double doors, leaving the bright harsh lights of the kitchen for the dimly lit elegant dining room. Aura was my masterpiece. The air smelled of expensive wine and delicate herbs. Soft jazz played through the hidden speakers, creating an atmosphere of pure luxury for Atlanta elite. But as I approached the entrance, the sophisticated murmur of my wealthy patrons was completely shattered by a voice I had prayed I would never hear again. "We are not waiting on your ridiculous list. I am a grandmother, and I am here to see my family." The shrill, entitled tone echoed off the mahogany walls. I stopped dead in my tracks. Standing right there in the middle of my beautifully curated lobby were the monsters of my past. My mother Brenda stood with her hands on her hips, wearing a designer dress that looked at least 5 years out of date, but was clearly chosen to project an image of wealth. Beside her stood my father Richard, holding his chest out with that same arrogant posture he used to intimidate me when I was a child. Next to them was my sister Kendra, the 32-year-old golden child draped in flashy jewelry that looked more like costume pieces than actual gold. And leaning against the host stand with a predatory smirk was Kendra's husband Dion. They looked entirely out of place. Their loud, abrasive behavior was a stark contrast to the refined environment I had built from the ground up. I felt a brief, sickening plunge in my stomach. A momentary flash of the scared 16-year-old girl shivering in the rain, begging her parents to let her back inside. But that girl was dead. I had buried her under years of relentless hard work, culinary school double shifts, and sheer force of will. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the heavy, high-quality cotton of my executive chef coat against my skin. I squared my shoulders and walked directly toward them. The hostess looked incredibly relieved when she saw me approaching. I stepped in front of the desk, blocking my family from advancing any further into the dining room. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice steady and cold. My mother stopped shouting and looked at me. Her eyes dragged up and down my flour-dusted apron and my plain white coat. Her upper lip curled in profound disgust. She did not see a successful woman. She saw a servant. "Jada," she scoffed, crossing her arms. "Look at you, smelling like an old frying pan. We do not have time for this nonsense. Go to the back and fetch Malik right now. We are his grandparents and we have a right to see him." I stared at her, letting the absolute absurdity of her demand hang in the quiet space between us. "You do not have any rights in this building," I said, keeping my tone completely flat. "And Malik is not a stray dog you can summon because you suddenly remembered he exists 19 years later." My father Richard stepped forward, trying to use his height to tower over me. "You watch your mouth when you speak to your mother," he growled, pointing a thick finger at my face. "We have been looking for you. We know Malik is 19 now. We are your family, Jada. It is time to let go of this childish grudge and bring our boy to us. A childish grudge. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. You call tossing a pregnant teenager onto the street a childish grudge? I asked, stepping closer to him, refusing to back down an inch. You told me I was a disease, Richard. You told me I was a mistake that was going to ruin your social standing. My family died the night you locked that front door while I cried on the porch. Kendra rolled her eyes, sighing loudly as if my trauma was just an annoying inconvenience to her evening. Oh, please, Jada, stop being so incredibly dramatic. It was nearly 20 years ago. Mom and Dad did what they had to do to teach you a lesson. And look at you now. You have a little cooking job. You should be thanking them for giving you the tough love you needed to find employment. Now just go get Malik so we can take him out to dinner. Dion chuckled, sliding a step closer. He looked around the luxurious restaurant with greedy, calculating eyes. Come on now, Jada. We just want to bridge the gap. It is all love here. No need to make a scene in front of your boss. The utter disrespect was breathtaking. They had marched into my domain, insulted me to my face, and demanded access to the son I had raised completely on my own. I could feel the eyes of the patrons in the front booths watching the exchange. I needed to shut this down immediately. This is not a public park, I said, raising my voice just enough to cut through their delusions. This is a private establishment. You are harassing my staff and disrupting my guests. You need to turn around and walk out those glass doors right now before I have my security team throw you onto the pavement. My mother laughed, a harsh grating sound that grated on my nerves. You think you can kick us out of here? You just work in the kitchen, Jada. You are a glorified line cook. Go get me the real manager. Go get the owner. I will tell them how you are treating paying customers, and I will have your little job by the end of the night. You will be back on the street exactly where you belong. I did not flinch. I did not yell. I simply looked at the woman who gave birth to me and smiled a cold, hollow smile. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my heavy brass master key, placing it firmly on the host stand. I am the owner, Brenda. I spoke the words slowly, letting each one strike her like a physical blow. The building you are standing in, the kitchen you are insulting, the chair you are demanding to sit in, it all belongs to me. Now get out of my restaurant. For a split second, genuine shock registered on my mother's face. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water as she stared at the heavy brass key resting on the mahogany wood. But Brenda was a master of manipulation. When backed into a corner, she never surrendered. She pivoted. She noticed the wealthy patrons in the velvet booths whispering and pointing. The socialite in her took over. Her shock instantly melted into a mask of profound theatrical agony. She pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes welling with crocodile tears. She did not lower her voice. Instead, she projected it so the entire dining room could hear her tragic performance. You hear that, Richard? She cried out, her voice trembling with perfectly calibrated sorrow. Our own daughter. After we spent 19 years searching for her, crying ourselves to sleep every single night, she stands here and treats us like criminals. She kidnapped my only grandson. She stole him from his loving family out of pure spite. I let out a harsh laugh that echoed through the lobby. Kidnapped, I repeated, stepping closer so she could not look away from me. You cannot kidnap someone who was thrown away like garbage. You did not spend 19 years searching for me, Brenda. You spent that night 19 years ago throwing heavy black trash bags full of my clothes onto the wet driveway. I was 16 years old. It was pouring rain, and you locked the deadbolt while I stood on the porch shivering and begging you to let me back in. My father. Richard puffed out his chest, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. Keep your voice down, Jada, he hissed, glancing nervously at the nearby tables. You are embarrassing this family. We gave you everything. We put a roof over your head, and you threw it all away by getting yourself into trouble. I gave you everything. I shot back, my voice ringing with absolute clarity. I was a straight-A student. I did everything perfectly until the day I needed my parents. And the moment my pregnancy threatened your precious reputation at the country club, you erased me. You called my unborn child a reputation-ruining mistake. You told me to my face that if I did not get rid of him, I was dead to you. So I died. And I took my son with me. You do not get to play the grieving grandparents now just because it suits your narrative. Kendra stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She looked me up and down, her eyes filled with the same condescending pity she used to torture me with when we were children. She reached up and adjusted a gaudy diamond necklace that looked far too heavy for her neck. "You are absolutely delusional, Jada," she sneered. "Kidnapped, thrown away. You always loved playing the victim. And this whole owner fantasy?" She laughed a sharp mocking sound, pointing a manicured finger at my white chef coat. "Look at you. You have grease stains on your cuffs and flour on your pants. Dion, look at her. She is having a psychotic break." Dion shook his head, offering a patronizing smile. "It is sad, really," he murmured loud enough for the hostess to hear. "Let us just get her some help, Kendra." Owner Kendra scoffed, stepping even closer, her expensive perfume failing to mask the bitter jealousy rolling off her. "You do not own this restaurant, Jada. You probably manage the fry station and want to sound important to punish Mom and Dad. You always were a jealous little liar. You could never stand the fact that I did things right. I went to college. I married a successful man. I gave Mom and Dad beautiful, legitimate grandchildren. And you just ran away to flip burgers. It is pathetic that you are standing here lying to our faces just to feel superior." I did not break eye contact with my sister. I did not raise my voice to match her shrill panic. The truth did not need to be screamed to be felt. "It must be exhausting, Kendra," I said smoothly. "It must be so exhausting waking up every day and pretending you are not drowning. You can insult my coat all you want, but this coat pays for the mortgage on this building. What does your husband pay for Dion? Because from where I am standing, your jewelry looks suspiciously like cubic zirconia, and that designer bag is a season out of date." Kendra's face flushed a dark, angry crimson. Her hand flew to her necklace defensively. "You shut your mouth, you bitter little cook!" She snapped, her carefully crafted wealthy persona slipping for a fraction of a second. "We did not come here to listen to your delusions. We came here for Malik. He is our blood." Brenda seized the opportunity to resume her performance. She actually turned to a couple sitting at the nearest table. "Look at her!" she cried to the stunned patrons. "We bought a crib. We painted a nursery. We were ready to welcome our grandson with open arms, and she ran away into the night just to punish us. She is a sick, vindictive girl." She grabbed Richard's arm, leaning heavily against him, as if her legs were giving out. "It is true," she wailed, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue she pulled from her fake designer purse. "We just want to see our boy. He has a right to know his real family. He has a right to know the people who love him. You have kept him poisoned against us his whole life, Jada. How could you be so cruel? How could you deprive a child of his grandparents?" I took a step forward, placing myself directly between my mother and my guests. "Do not involve my customers in your delusions," I warned her. "You did not paint a nursery. You handed me a pamphlet for a clinic and told me I had 48 hours to fix my mistake or I would be homeless. When I refused, you made good on your threat. Do not stand in my restaurant and pretend you were a martyr." The audacity of her words was almost suffocating. She was weaving a tapestry of lies right in front of my staff, right in front of my guests, banking on the assumption that social pressure would force me to capitulate. She thought I was still the scared teenager who desperately craved her approval. She thought if she made enough of a scene, I would bow my head, apologize, and hand over my son just to keep the peace. "You do not love Malik," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet tone that finally made Dion shift uncomfortably on his feet. "You do not even know him. You do not know his favorite color. You do not know what he studies at college. You do not know if he is left-handed or right-handed. You do not know him because you chose your country club friends over his life." Richard took an aggressive step forward, his fists clenched at his sides. "I am your father," he barked, trying to establish the dominance he used to rule our household. "I am telling you to go to the back right now and bring that boy out here. We are taking him to dinner, and we are going to explain to him how his mother is a pathological liar who kept him away from his heritage. I felt a muscle in my jaw feather. I looked around the lobby. The whispering had stopped. The entire front section of my restaurant was completely silent, watching the drama unfold. I knew I had a choice to make. I could have my security guards drag them out, kicking and screaming, which would end up on every local gossip blog in Atlanta by morning. Or I could control the narrative. I could give them exactly what they asked for and let them dig their own graves. I realized then that this was not a random visit. They did not just suddenly grow a conscience after 2 decades. Something else was driving this desperate public spectacle. The way Dion kept scanning the room, calculating the wealth. The way Kendra clung to her cheap jewelry while trying to look rich. The way my father demanded access to Malik instead of asking about my well-being. They wanted something, and whatever it was, they thought Malik was the key to getting it. I raised my right hand and caught the eye of David, the head of my security team. He is a massive, imposing man who spent years doing private security for high-profile clients before I hired him to protect my flagship property. He knew exactly how to handle unwanted guests without causing a brawl. David nodded firmly and stepped out from the shadows near the brass-lined bar, flanked by 2 other guards in immaculate dark suits. They moved silently toward my family, their presence radiating an absolute zero-tolerance policy. "Gentlemen," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and professional. "Please escort these people out of my restaurant. If they resist, call the police and press charges for trespassing." Brenda saw the large men in suits closing in on her. She realized her screaming had not broken me. The public intimidation tactic had completely failed to produce the terrified, submissive daughter she expected. So she reached for the nuclear option. Right there in the middle of the elegant dining room, my mother threw herself onto the cold marble floor. Her knees hit the ground with a loud, heavy thud. She let out a guttural, agonizing wail that sounded like a wounded animal. Diners jumped in their seats. Waiters stopped dead in their tracks, holding heavy trays of expensive food. The soft jazz playing through the speakers was completely eclipsed by her theatrical sobbing. "Richard," she screamed, clutching her chest as if she had been shot. "Oh, Richard, I cannot bear it." She frantically dug into her outdated purse, tearing through old receipts and tangled charging cables until she pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. She held it up toward the ceiling as if it were a holy relic. "Please, Jada," she sobbed, her face contorted in a mask of sheer desperation. "I did not want to tell you like this. We did not want to ruin your night, but we have no choice. Your father is dying." The entire restaurant fell deathly quiet. You could hear a pin drop in the dining room. Even Kendra looked momentarily surprised before quickly arranging her features into a mask of solemn, overwhelming grief. My father placed a heavy hand over his heart, looking down at the floor with a stoic, tragic expression, acting like a brave man facing his final days. "He has a rare heart condition." Brenda wept, waving the crumpled paper in the air for everyone to see. "The doctors gave him 6 months. Maybe less. His heart is failing, Jada. His dying wish, his only dying wish in this world, is to look his grandson in the eyes before he passes away. Please, I am begging you on my hands and knees, do not let your father die with a broken heart." I stared at the paper in her hand. From where I stood, I could see it clearly. It was a basic printout. There was no hospital letterhead. There was no official seal and no doctor's signature. It looked like a generic text document she had typed up in a public library. It was an absolute, unapologetic fabrication. Richard looked perfectly healthy. His color was good, his breathing was even, and he had the energy to shout at me just moments ago. But the truth of his medical condition did not matter. What mattered was the soft glow of smartphone screens lighting up the dim restaurant. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw at least half a dozen patrons holding their phones up, recording the entire scene. My mind raced, going through the brutal calculations of modern public relations. If I allowed David to drag a sobbing elderly woman and a supposedly dying man out of my restaurant, the footage would be on social media before midnight. The headlines would write themselves. Wealthy restaurant owner throws dying father onto the street. Cancel culture does not wait for context. The internet would not care that these people threw a pregnant teenager into a thunderstorm 19 years ago. The public loves a villain, and my family was serving me up on a silver platter. They were holding my business reputation hostage, and they knew it. I signaled David to hold his position. I stepped closer to my mother, looking down at her pathetic display on the marble floor. I crouched down so my face was exactly level with hers. I could smell the cheap floral perfume she always wore. "You are a terrible actress," I whispered so quietly that only she could hear the venom in my voice. "But you have an audience tonight, so you win this round." Brenda glared at me, her tears magically stopping for a fraction of a second as pure hatred flashed in her eyes. Then I stood back up and addressed the group loud enough for the smartphone microphones to capture my response. "If Richard is truly ill, I will not deny a dying man peace," I said, forcing every ounce of polite empathy I could fake into my voice. "I will let you meet Malik, but you will not disrupt my business or harass my staff ever again. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We will meet at the Roasted Bean Coffee Shop on the south side of town. It is a neutral public space. You will get exactly 15 minutes. No yelling, no demands. If you cause a scene, I will walk out with my son and you will never see either of us again. Do we have an agreement?" Brenda scrambled to her feet, brushing the invisible dust off her dress and clutching her fake medical document to her chest. "Oh, thank you, Jada," she cried, reaching out as if to hug me. I took a sharp step back, refusing to let her touch me. David and his team immediately moved in, forming a solid physical barrier between my family and me. "Show them the door," I instructed David, my voice dropping back to its cold, commanding tone. My parents and Kendra turned to leave, whispering among themselves. I could see the triumphant little smiles playing on their lips. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully bullied me into submission, just like they used to do when I was a child. But as they walked toward the heavy glass exit doors, Dion paused. My brother-in-law let the rest of the family walk ahead of him. He turned back to look at me over his shoulder. The mask of the concerned, supportive husband was completely gone. He slowly scanned the luxurious restaurant, taking in the crystal chandeliers, the expensive artwork, the imported wine lining the walls, and finally resting his gaze on me. His eyes were cold, calculating, and relentlessly hungry. It was the distinct look of a predator staring at an open bank vault. He was not looking at a reunited family member. He was looking at a mark. A chill ran down my spine as the reality of the situation locked into place. This fake medical emergency had absolutely nothing to do with a dying wish. It had nothing to do with guilt or making amends. Dion was drowning in his own financial failures, and he was looking for a massive payout. He had clearly done his research and realized my 19-year-old son was sitting on something extremely valuable. They did not come to Aura for a family reunion. They came for a heist, and tomorrow afternoon they were going to spring their trap. I sat across from my 19-year-old son at our granite kitchen island the next morning, pouring 2 cups of black coffee. Malik was everything my family was not. He was brilliant, grounded, fiercely loyal, and currently in his sophomore year at Morehouse College studying corporate law. I did not sugarcoat anything about the incident at the restaurant. I never have. I raised him with absolute transparency regarding my past because I knew the day might come when these people would try to find us. When I told him about Brenda throwing herself on the floor and the fake medical document, Malik just leaned back in his tall bar stool and folded his arms. His face remained completely impassive. He had inherited my ability to compartmentalize raw emotion and view situations strategically. We knew exactly why they were suddenly so desperate for a family reunion. It had nothing to do with me and everything to do with him. A few months ago, Malik turned 19, legally inheriting a modest estate left behind by his biological father, who had passed away when Malik was a toddler. It was not a massive fortune, but to a family drowning in debt, it must have looked like a winning lottery ticket. A private investigator or a loose-lipped bank clerk must have tipped Dion off. They thought Malik was a naive teenager sitting on a pile of liquid cash, with only a struggling restaurant worker for a mother. We formed a game plan right there in my kitchen. We were going to give them exactly enough rope to hang themselves. To sell the illusion that I was just a desperate single mother working a grueling line cook job, I dressed the part meticulously. I pulled on a pair of faded denim jeans and a plain gray sweater that I kept for messy yard work. I tied my hair back in a simple messy knot and scrubbed off all my makeup. Instead of taking my armored luxury SUV, we took my old reliable commuter sedan, a 10-year-old car I kept exclusively for running inconspicuous errands around the city. As I pulled into the crowded pothole-filled parking lot of the Roasted Bean coffee shop on the south side of town, I looked over at Malik. He was wearing a simple college hoodie and dark jeans, looking exactly like an average unassuming college student. "You ready?" I asked, putting the car in park and turning off the engine. He gave a sharp, single nod. "Let us go meet the relatives," he said, his voice laced with a dry, biting sarcasm. We walked through the glass doors and were instantly hit with the smell of cheap roasted beans and burnt milk. The coffee shop was loud, chaotic, and aggressively mediocre, perfectly fitting for a meeting I wanted to keep entirely off the radar of my usual elite circles. I spotted them almost immediately. They had claimed a large corner booth by the front window, treating the sticky laminate table like a VIP section. My father, Richard, the man who was supposedly on his deathbed with a rare failing heart condition, was currently inhaling a massive sugary blueberry muffin and holding an extra-large iced coffee topped with a mountain of whipped cream. His skin color was fantastic. He looked like a man who had just returned from a relaxing weekend at a luxury golf resort, not a man with 6 months to live. There was no oxygen tank, no wheelchair, no sign of physical distress whatsoever. Brenda was frantically applying bright red lipstick, using the reflection of her phone screen, while Kendra and Dion sat across from them, looking utterly bored and impatient. The moment Brenda locked eyes with us walking down the aisle, her entire demeanor violently shifted. She shoved her phone into her oversized designer purse and practically leaped out of the vinyl booth. "Oh my goodness!" she squealed, her voice piercing through the dull, ambient roar of the crowded coffee shop. She pushed right past me, completely ignoring my physical presence as if I were totally invisible. She threw her arms wide and lunged toward my son. "Look at you!" she cried, grabbing his broad shoulders and attempting to pull him into a suffocating hug. "Look at our handsome prince!" I stepped aside, crossing my arms, and simply watching the grotesque display of fake affection. Kendra slid out of the booth, next beaming an overly bright artificial smile that did not reach her eyes. She reached out and patted Malik on the arm, completely overlooking the fact that he was a grown man who did not know her at all. "You are so tall," Kendra gushed, batting her eyelashes heavily coated in mascara. "And so incredibly handsome. You definitely get your good looks and height from our side of the family." I stood there entirely unnoticed. No one said hello to me. No one asked how my shift went or how I was doing after not seeing them for nearly 2 decades. To them, I was merely the unpaid delivery service that had finally dropped off their grand prize. Malik handled the ambush perfectly. He gently but firmly detached himself from Brenda's tight grip and took a deliberate step back, establishing a clear, rigid physical boundary. "It is nice to meet you," he said, his tone perfectly polite but carrying the unmistakable chill of a corporate boardroom. He slid into the booth, sitting on the outside edge, making sure I had enough room to sit right next to him. I slid in beside him, leaning back against the cheap, squeaky vinyl seat and resting my hands in my lap. Dion finally looked at me, offering a tight, smug smile that told me he thought he had the ultimate upper hand. He looked at my faded gray sweater and then at the scratched keys to my old sedan resting on the table. His eyes lit up with deep, greedy satisfaction. He was completely buying the struggling, broke single mom routine. He thought I was weak, uneducated, and desperate. Richard wiped sticky muffin crumbs from his mouth and let out a heavy, dramatic sigh, suddenly remembering he was supposed to be a dying man holding on to his final moments. He slumped his broad shoulders forward and placed a hand over his chest, trying to look frail and broken. "Son, it is an absolute blessing to see you before the good Lord calls me home," Richard rasped, putting on a weak, breathy voice that sounded nothing like the aggressive man shouting in my restaurant lobby 12 hours earlier. Malik rested his elbows on the laminate table and leaned forward, looking directly into his grandfather's eyes with intense focus. "It is truly a medical miracle that you are sitting here today," Malik said, his face a mask of absolute sincerity. "When my mother told me you had a terminal heart condition, I assumed you would be on continuous oxygen therapy, or at least confined to a specialized cardiac ward. How are your doctors managing the severe vascular inflammation?" Richard blinked rapidly, clearly caught completely off guard by the specific medical vocabulary coming from a teenager. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, looking across the table at Brenda for help. Brenda cleared her throat, waving a hand dismissively in the air. "Oh, the doctors are doing everything they possibly can," she stammered, her confident facade cracking for a split second. "Experimental treatments. Very expensive, very exclusive pills from Europe. But enough about sadness and sickness. We are here to celebrate our beautiful family being back together." "But I insist," Malik countered smoothly, not letting them off the hook and pressing the advantage. "As a concerned family member, I should be fully informed about the timeline. What is the exact diagnosis? Is it restrictive cardiomyopathy or perhaps severe aortic stenosis? I only ask because eating a high-sodium diet, like that massive commercial muffin, and drinking a high-sugar iced coffee is usually an immediate death sentence for advanced heart failure patients. You must have an incredibly resilient system to survive that breakfast." The tension at the table spiked so fast it was almost palpable. Kendra choked on her iced latte, coughing loudly into her paper napkin and glaring at Malik. Dion shot a sharp, angry warning glare at Richard. Brenda's face flushed a deep, humiliating crimson as she realized my 19-year-old son was not the gullible, easily manipulated child they thought he was. He was politely but ruthlessly dissecting their lie right to their faces and forcing them to sit in the uncomfortable reality of their own absurd deception. Richard straightened his posture, dropping the frail dying act entirely as genuine irritation flashed across his face. "It is complicated medical jargon, boy," he snapped, his real harsh voice slipping through the cracks. "You do not need to worry your young head about hospital business. We did not come all the way down here to talk about doctors. We came here to talk about your future." I watched Dion lean forward, his eyes locking onto Malik with laser focus. This was it. The fake medical emergency had been clumsily pushed aside within 5 minutes of us sitting down. They could not even sustain the lie long enough to finish their cheap drinks. Dion adjusted the collar of his dress shirt, trying to project an aura of immense wealth and authority that completely failed to mask his underlying desperation. He reached down into his leather briefcase and pulled out a glossy folder. He placed the glossy folder onto the center of the table, right next to my scratched car keys. The cover featured a poorly photoshopped image of a modern glass skyscraper and the words Apex Prestige Holdings printed in a cheap gold foil that was already peeling at the edges. Dion leaned forward, steepling his fingers together in a practiced pose that he had probably seen in a late-night business seminar. "Family is about building wealth together. Malik," he began, his voice dropping into a smooth, rehearsed cadence that made my skin crawl. "Your grandparents have missed you. We all have. But we are also here because we recognize that you are stepping into manhood. You recently turned 19. That is a major milestone, and with major milestones comes serious financial responsibilities." I watched the muscles in Dion's jaw work. He was trying his absolute best to sound like a seasoned venture capitalist, but I could smell the stale sweat of pure desperation underneath his heavy, expensive cologne. Then he dropped the bomb that finally revealed their entire hand. "We know about the financial blessing your biological father left for you," Dion said, lowering his voice to feign respect. "May he rest in peace." It is a blessing, but it is also a heavy burden for a young man to manage a sudden influx of liquid cash all by himself. My blood ran cold, and then immediately boiled over. He was talking about David, my late partner, the man who had taken me in when I was broken and terrified, the man who loved Malik fiercely before a terrible accident took his life when our son was just a toddler. My parents had never once asked about David. They never attended his funeral. They never sent a sympathy card. They acted as if he never existed. But the moment they realized his death resulted in a delayed probate payout for Malik, they suddenly cared deeply about his legacy. I realized exactly how they found us after 19 years of total silence. It had absolutely nothing to do with a sudden change of heart or a medical emergency. They had hired a private investigator to track public probate records. They knew Malik had legally inherited his trust fund just a few months ago when he turned 19. They looked at the paperwork and saw a teenage boy with a dead father and a supposedly broke, uneducated mother. They saw the easiest payday of their miserable lives. The banks offer terrible interest rates. Dion continued confidently tapping the cheap folder with his index finger. You leave that money sitting in a traditional savings account, and inflation will eat it alive. What I am offering you today is an exclusive ground floor opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime real estate investment that we are only keeping strictly within the family. Malik looked at the folder but did not immediately reach for it. What kind of real estate? He asked, his tone expressing nothing more than mild, polite curiosity. Dion smiled broadly, flashing perfectly bleached teeth. Multi-family housing. We are acquiring a block of distressed properties in a rapidly gentrifying neighborhood right outside the city limits. We go in, we renovate the units, we flip the leases to higher-paying tenants, and we hold the assets for long-term passive income. It is a bulletproof strategy. I already have the general contractors lined up. I have the city zoning permits fast-tracked. All I need is a silent partner to provide the initial liquid capital to close the escrow. We are talking a guaranteed 30% return on your investment within the first 18 months. Kendra leaned across the table, her eyes wide and dangerously eager. Dion is an absolute genius with properties, Malik, she gushed, placing a hand over her heart. He has made us so much money over the years. We just wanted to keep this incredible opportunity in the family. Why let some corporate stranger get rich when we can help our own nephew build a lasting legacy? I stared at my sister. The sheer audacity of her lie was staggering. If Dion was a real estate genius, she would not be wearing a cubic zirconia necklace that was already turning her neck slightly green. If he was making them so much money, they would not be desperately trying to hustle a college sophomore in a cheap coffee shop on a Tuesday morning. I kept my mouth firmly shut, playing the role of the intimidated poor mother perfectly. I picked up my paper cup and took a slow, deliberate sip of my bitter coffee, watching them dig their trap deeper. Malik finally reached out and opened the folder. He scanned the first page. His eyes moved rapidly over the printed text. I had taught him how to read complex profit and loss statements before he even had his driver license. By the time he was 17, he was actively managing the dividend portfolio for my corporate holding company. The garbage prospectus Dion had printed out was a complete insult to his intelligence. This proposal is certainly interesting, Malik said, flipping to the second page of the document. But I do not see a detailed breakdown of your debt-to-equity ratio. You are asking for a significant capital injection, but you have not listed the current liens on these distressed properties. Furthermore, a promised 30% return seems highly speculative without a comprehensive market analysis attached. Are these properties currently zoned for commercial use or strictly high-density residential? Dion's smile faltered instantly. His eyes darted nervously around the table. He was expecting a naive 19-year-old boy who would be blinded by the promise of fast, easy money. He was entirely unprepared for a meticulous cross-examination by a Morehouse student studying corporate law. Well, Dion stammered, pulling slightly at his tight shirt collar. Those are just preliminary projections. The deep financials are handled by my accounting team back at the office. You do not need to worry about the boring administrative details, Malik. As a silent partner, your only job is to provide the funding and let me handle the heavy lifting. You just sit back and collect the checks." Richard slammed his heavy hand down on the table, rattling the coffee cups and making the plastic spoons jump. The dying man act was now completely abandoned. "Listen to your uncle, boy." My father barked, his aggressive, authoritative tone returning in full force. "He is an experienced businessman. He is offering you a seat at the adult table. Do not disrespect him by interrogating him like you are some kind of bank teller." Malik did not flinch at the sudden outburst. He simply closed the glossy folder and slid it back across the laminate table toward Dion. "I mean no disrespect," Malik said, his voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of intimidation. "It is simply my standard practice to review the complete financial architecture of any joint venture before committing my capital. If you can provide the audited tax returns for Apex Prestige Holdings for the last 3 fiscal years, along with the certified title deeds for the distressed properties in question, I will be happy to have my financial advisor look it over." Dion stared at the closed folder as if it had suddenly caught fire. He did not have audited tax returns. He did not have title deeds. He had a shell company drowning in massive debt and a desperate, frantic need for a cash injection to stave off his creditors. Brenda let out a loud, exasperated sigh, glaring directly at me as if this failure was entirely my fault. She assumed I had poisoned my son against them and instructed him to be difficult. She had absolutely no idea that I had simply educated him to spot a scam artist from a mile away. Your financial advisor, Kendra, scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. "What advisor, Malik? You are a teenager living in a dorm room. You do not have advisors. You just have her." Kendra pointed a sharp, manicured finger directly at my face, her features twisting with bitter, naked resentment. "She is probably trying to steal your inheritance to pay off her own debts. We are your real family, Malik. We are trying to protect you from her." Kendra lunged across the small space between us and grabbed both of Malik's hands. Her long acrylic nails dug sharply into his skin as she leaned over the sticky laminate table. The aggressive, bitter mask she wore just a second ago instantly dissolved, replaced by a sudden theatrical display of overwhelming sorrow. Tears welled up in her eyes, perfectly timed and completely insincere. "Please, Malik," she begged, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "You have to understand the pressure we are under. We did not want to burden you with this. We wanted to protect you. But the truth is, our family legacy is in serious danger." I sat back and watched the performance unfold. This was the pivot. Dion's high-pressure sales pitch had completely failed to impress a college student who knew how to read a balance sheet, so Kendra was immediately deploying the emotional manipulation tactic. "Our family home." Kendra continued, her voice cracking perfectly on cue. "The beautiful house where your mother grew up. The house where we shared so many incredible memories. It is facing some minor tax issues, just a temporary cash flow problem due to the current economic climate. The county is being completely unreasonable, and they are threatening to put a lien on the property." Brenda nodded solemnly, dabbing at the corner of her eye with a napkin to ensure she did not ruin her mascara. "It is true," she whispered, sounding like a tragic heroine in a cheap soap opera. "Your grandfather worked his entire life to pay for that estate. It breaks his failing heart to think we might lose it to the bank." Kendra squeezed Malik's hands tighter, ignoring his subtle attempt to pull away. "Dion investment project is real," she insisted, "but the initial capital he needs is actually going to be used to save the family home first. Then the rest goes into the real estate flip. We are offering you a chance to be the hero, Malik. You can save your grandparents from being thrown out onto the street in their final years. We would ask your mother, but Kendra shot me a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. Well, look at her. She is working a minimum wage kitchen job and still holding on to decades of bitter resentment. She could not help us even if she wanted to. You are the only one with the resources to keep this family together." The lies were layered so thick, It was hard to breathe the air around the table. They were taking my childhood trauma, the very home they had violently banished me from, and twisting it into a sob story to extort money from my teenage son. They called it an ancestral home, but it was just a tacky, oversized mansion in a gated community that they had leveraged to the hilt to fund their luxurious country club lifestyle. Malik looked at his hands trapped in Kendra grip. Then he looked at his grandfather, who was once again attempting to look frail and sickly. Finally, Malik looked at Dion, who was watching the exchange with bated breath, desperately hoping his wife emotional terrorism would close the deal he had botched. Malik took a deep breath. He gently but firmly pried Kendra's fingers off his hands and placed his hands flat on the table. He softened his expression, dropping the stern corporate interrogation demeanor he had used with Dion and replacing it with the gentle, concerned look of a loving grandson. I had taught him well. He knew that if you want to catch a predator, you have to make them believe they are the ones laying the trap. I understand, Malik said, his voice low and comforting. I had no idea the family was facing such severe financial distress. I completely agree that preserving our legacy is important. Nobody wants to see their grandparents lose their home. Brenda let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief, pressing her hand against her chest. "Oh, bless you," she cried. "Bless your sweet, generous heart. I knew you were a good boy. I knew you would not let your mother poison you against your own blood." Dion practically vibrated with excitement. He immediately grabbed the glossy folder and pushed it across the table until it touched Malik's arm. "Exactly, Malik," he said, his voice slick with renewed confidence. "We keep the wealth in the family. We protect our own. All I need is your signature on the preliminary funding agreement and a certified wire transfer by the end of the week to clear the county tax hurdle. Then we move forward with the real estate acquisitions. It is a seamless process." Malik picked up the folder. He did not open it again. He simply held it in his hands, feeling the weight of their desperation. He looked around the table, making eye contact with every single one of them. "I will take this," Malik said, offering a polite, innocent smile that completely masked the absolute trap he was setting. "I cannot sign anything today, of course. That would be reckless. But I will have my financial advisor look at the paperwork this afternoon. If the tax issues on the family home are as minor as you say, and the distressed property acquisitions check out, we can discuss moving forward with the capital injection." The reaction at the table was instantaneous and euphoric. It was as if a massive, crushing weight had been lifted off their collective shoulders. They had done it. They had successfully hooked the wealthy, gullible teenager. Dion let out a loud, booming laugh, clapping his hands together. "That is exactly what I like to hear," he declared, pointing a finger at Malik. "Smart business. You have your people talk to my people. We will get this ironed out in no time." Richard sat up, completely abandoning the dying man routine once again. He reached across the table and clapped Malik heavily on the shoulder. "You are a good man, boy," my father boomed, projecting the loud, arrogant voice of a patriarch who had just secured his kingdom. "You are doing the right thing. You are showing respect for your elders." Kendra was beaming. Her eyes practically shone with the reflection of the money she thought she was about to receive. She reached into her expensive designer purse and pulled out a business card, sliding it toward Malik. "Here is Dion direct office line," she said. "Have your little advisor call him tomorrow morning. Do not wait too long. We have tight deadlines with the county." I sat quietly watching them celebrate their supposed victory. They were so blinded by their own greed and arrogance that they could not see the massive, fatal flaw in their plan. They actually believed that a 19-year-old college student had a small-time financial advisor sitting in some strip mall office who could be easily bullied or charmed by Dion's fake corporate jargon. They were completely unaware that Malik advisor was not a single person. His advisor was the wealth management division of my corporate holding company. A team of highly paid, ruthless financial sharks who spent their days auditing massive corporate mergers and dismantling hostile takeovers. By handing Malik that folder, Dion had just voluntarily surrendered the keys to his entire fraudulent financial life. Brenda stood up, smoothing down her outdated dress. She looked incredibly smug. "Well, this has been a wonderful reunion," she announced loudly, making sure the people at the neighboring tables could hear her. "We are so proud of you, Malik. We will see you very soon." She did not even look at me. None of them did. They completely ignored my existence, grabbing their coats and walking out of the coffee shop with their heads held high, leaving their empty cups and muffin wrappers littered across the table. They left the establishment without even offering to pay for the drinks they had consumed. I watched them walk out to the parking lot and climb into Dion's flashy leased luxury SUV. I waited until they pulled out into traffic and disappeared down the street. Malik tossed the glossy folder onto the table next to my car keys. He let out a long, slow breath, shaking his head in sheer disbelief. "That was the most pathetic sales pitch I have ever witnessed in my entire life," he said, reaching for his cold coffee. "They are entirely leveraged. If they are begging a 19-year-old for tax money, they are probably weeks away from complete foreclosure." I picked up the folder and slid it into my leather bag. "They are drowning," I replied, keeping my voice calm and measured. "And they just handed us the anchor." We walked out to my old commuter sedan and got inside. I started the engine, the reliable hum a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of the meeting we had just survived. I pulled out my phone and dialed the direct private line to the lead attorney at my corporate firm. He answered on the first ring. "Marcus," I said, skipping the pleasantries, "I am sending a courier to your office with a folder from a company called Apex Prestige Holdings, operated by a man named Dion. I want a complete forensic audit. I want to know every shell company he owns, every property he has leveraged, and exactly how much debt my parents have on their primary residence. Find out who holds their mortgage, and find out who is holding Dion business loans." I paused, shifting the car into drive. "I want to buy all of their debt, Marcus. Every single cent of it. Put it under the holding company with Malik as the primary shareholder. Do it quietly and do it fast." "Understood, Jada," the attorney replied, his voice crisp and strictly professional. "We will begin the acquisition process immediately." I hung up the phone and pulled out of the parking lot, driving back toward the city skyline. The family thought they had won the lottery. They had no idea they had just stepped onto a financial landmine, and I was holding the detonator. It only took 48 hours for their patience to completely evaporate. Dion was clearly feeling the crushing pressure of his mounting debts, and my mother was never good at waiting for anything she felt entitled to. I was sitting at the massive oak desk in my private office, reviewing the preliminary audit reports my legal team had just sent over when my personal cell phone buzzed. It was a direct message from Malik. There was no text attached to the message, just a single audio file. I closed my office door, locked it, and put on my noise-canceling headphones before pressing play. The crisp ambient sound of the Morehouse College quad filled my ears. I could hear the distant chatter of college students walking between classes and the soft rustling of autumn wind through the large oak trees on campus. Then, cutting through the peaceful collegiate atmosphere, I heard the sharp, frantic clicking of Kendra heavy designer heels on the concrete walkway. "Malik, wait." Kendra's voice was breathless and laced with an artificial panic. "Malik, please wait a second." I listened as the sound of my son's steady footsteps came to a halt. "Kendra, Brenda, what are you doing here on campus?" He did not call them aunt or grandmother. He kept his tone strictly objective and perfectly detached, showing absolutely no surprise at their sudden, uninvited appearance outside his dormitory. Brenda spoke next, her voice dropping into a dramatic hushed whisper that she always used when she was about to deliver a monumental lie. "We had to come see you privately, Malik. We had to get to you before your mother found out we were talking to you. It is a matter of absolute life or death urgency." "I do not understand," Malik said. I could hear the subtle rustle of denim fabric as he shifted his stance, likely adjusting his phone in his pocket to ensure the microphone captured every single word they spoke. "Is Richard experiencing another severe heart episode? Should I call an ambulance for him?" No, no. Kendra interrupted quickly, waving away the terminal medical lie they had completely abandoned days ago. This is not about Dad and his heart. This is about your money, Malik. This is about protecting your future from Jada. Hearing my own sister speak my name with such concentrated venom through the headphones made my blood run instantly cold. They were not just greedy and desperate. They were actively trying to destroy the foundation of trust between me and my son. They had driven straight to his college campus to isolate him from my influence, hoping to break him down through psychological manipulation. Protect my future from my mother, Malik asked, his tone projecting the exact perfect amount of naive confusion we had rehearsed. Why would I ever need to do that? Brenda let out a heavy, tragic sigh, playing the role of the burdened, weeping matriarch. Oh, my sweet boy. Jada has always been deeply unstable. We did not want to burden you with the ugly truth of our family history on our very first meeting, but you leave us absolutely no choice. We have to protect you. Your mother is a very sick, vindictive woman. She has a long documented history of taking things that do not belong to her. Kendra immediately jumped in to reinforce the horrific lie. When Jada lived with us, she stole thousands of dollars from my college fund. She drained our parents' private savings accounts to fund her wild, reckless teenage lifestyle. That is the real reason she left home, Malik. She was not kicked out into the rain like she probably told you. She ran away in the middle of the night because my father was about to call the police and have her arrested for grand theft. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. I sat frozen in my office chair, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the edge of my desk. They were projecting their own current financial crimes onto my teenage self. They were the ones drowning in debt and defrauding investors. And here they were, standing on a prestigious college campus trying to convince my hardworking son that his mother was a runaway criminal. She knows about your inheritance. Brenda continued, her voice trembling with perfectly executed fake emotion. She is manipulating you, Malik. She is going to drain your trust fund accounts just like she drained ours all those years ago. She will spend every last penny and leave you with absolutely nothing to your name. That is incredibly serious, Malik said, sounding appropriately shocked and deeply concerned. I had no idea she had a criminal past. But what does this have to do with Dion and his real estate investment? Dion is trying to save you from her, Kendra urged, her voice taking on a desperate, frantic edge. If you wire the funds directly to his limited liability company today, we can legally shield your money from Jada. Once the capital is safely secured in the Apex Prestige Holdings corporate account, your mother will not be able to touch a single dime. Dion will act as your financial guardian, and your money will be perfectly safe. We have the official wire transfer forms right here, Brenda said. I could hear the distinct sound of paper crinkling through the audio file as she shoved the documents toward him. You just need to sign at the bottom and authorize the bank transfer. Dion can process it this afternoon. You will be safe, Malik. Your legacy will be protected from her greed. They were cornering a 19-year-old boy, aggressively pressuring him to sign away hundreds of thousands of dollars under the guise of protecting him. It was textbook financial abuse and extortion. They were actively documenting their own crime on tape without realizing they were walking right into a trap. I held my breath, waiting to hear how Malik would handle the heavy pressure. I had raised him to be incredibly strong, but facing down two relentless, lifelong manipulators alone was a massive burden. I appreciate you bringing this disturbing information to my attention, Malik said, his voice remaining rock steady and completely unbothered by their emotional terrorism. If my mother is truly attempting to misappropriate my funds, I absolutely need to secure them immediately. Yes, exactly. Kendra breathed, a wave of palpable relief washing over her recorded words. Just sign the paper right now, Malik. However, Malik continued smoothly, completely ignoring her frantic command to sign the document. I cannot authorize a massive wire transfer standing on a busy concrete sidewalk. Federal bank regulations require strict verification for any amounts exceeding $10,000. I need you to have Dion email me the official banking routing numbers, the tax identification number for Apex Prestige Holdings, and the articles of incorporation. Send them directly to my secure email address. I will take those documents to the main bank branch myself to ensure the transfer is processed without triggering an automatic fraud alert." There was a long, tense pause on the recording. Brenda and Kendra were greedy, but they were also incredibly desperate. They wanted the money in their hands that exact second, but Malik was offering them a perfectly logical, legally sound reason for a slight delay. They could not argue with federal banking regulations without blowing their cover. "You will take it to the bank today?" Kendra asked, her voice tight with lingering anxiety. "As soon as you send the complete documentation," Malik promised confidently. "The faster Dion emails me the corporate details, the faster we can secure the funds away from my mother." "Okay," Brenda said, sounding completely defeated by his calm, flawless logic. "Okay, we will have Dion send the email right now. Just do not tell Jada about this conversation. Do not say a single word to her, Malik." "My lips are completely sealed," Malik replied. "Have a safe drive home." The audio file clicked and went dead, leaving my office in total silence. I pulled my headphones off and leaned back in my leather chair, letting out a long, slow breath. A slow, victorious smile spread across my face. They had just handed us the final piece of the legal puzzle. By demanding a wire transfer under false pretenses and promising to send their fraudulent corporate banking details across state lines via email, Dion and my family had just escalated their pathetic little scam into federal wire fraud. Malik executed our stalling strategy with absolute perfection. Later that afternoon, he sent a highly formal email to Dion requesting the specific tax identification numbers, articles of incorporation, and certified proof of escrow required by federal banking laws. Dion, sweating bullets under the pressure, tried to send back poorly forged documents and a frantic email begging Malik to just push the wire transfer through using a personal cash application. Malik politely replied that his bank had already flagged the large amount and required the exact corporate documentation to proceed effectively, halting the transfer indefinitely without ever actually saying no. He left Dion completely trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare of his own making. When the family realized they were not getting the money instantly, their desperation violently mutated into explosive rage. They realized they could not bully my son, so they decided to destroy me. 2 days later, I was standing in the main dining room of Aura going over the new seasonal menu with my executive sous chef when my phone began to vibrate relentlessly in my pocket. It was not just one or two notifications. It was a continuous, heavy buzzing that signaled a coordinated digital attack. I pulled my phone out and looked at the screen. My public professional chef page and the official business page for my restaurant were being absolutely flooded with hundreds of notifications. I opened the application, and my stomach tightened. They had gone nuclear. Kendra had orchestrated a massive smear campaign rallying her fake country club friends and desperate socialites to flood my pages with vitriol. She had posted a massive multi-paragraph diatribe on her own public page, tagging my restaurant and my name. In the post, she claimed I was a pathological liar who had stolen thousands of dollars from my parents when I was a teenager. She accused me of financially abusing my 19-year-old son, holding his trust fund hostage to fund my own lavish lifestyle. She painted herself as the heartbroken, loving aunt who was simply trying to rescue her nephew from a toxic, narcissistic mother. Below her post, Brenda had uploaded a highly produced, tearful video. My mother sat on the edge of a plush sofa, dabbing her eyes with a tissue directly facing the camera. She looked directly into the lens and delivered a performance worthy of a daytime television award. She cried about how she had tried to forgive me for my troubled past, but that she could no longer stay silent while I abused my own child. She practically begged her followers to boycott Aura, claiming that every dollar spent at my establishment was funding the destruction of a deeply loving Christian family. But Dion took it a step further. He did not just attack my character, he attacked my livelihood. Using dozens of fake accounts, he and his associates began leaving one-star reviews on my restaurant business page. They fabricated horrific stories about finding glass in their food, contracting severe food poisoning, and witnessing health code violations in my kitchen. The notifications kept pouring in, each one more vile and legally actionable than the last. My sous chef noticed the sudden shift in my demeanor and asked if everything was all right. I locked my phone screen and slipped it back into my pocket, taking a slow, steadying breath. Everything is perfectly fine, I told him, my voice remarkably calm given the inferno erupting online. Let us finalize the wine pairings for the tasting menu. I did not panic. I did not rush to my keyboard to fire back angry defensive replies. I knew that the absolute worst thing you can give a narcissist is a public reaction. Engaging with them online would only validate their smear campaign and drag my premium brand down into the mud with them. Instead, I walked back to my private office and called David, my head of security. I gave David one simple directive. I instructed his cybersecurity team to archive every single post screenshot, every comment download, every video, and trace the internet protocol addresses of every fake account leaving negative reviews on my restaurant page. I wanted airtight digital forensics. They thought they were launching a public relations war to pressure me into releasing my son money. In reality, they were meticulously documenting their own targeted corporate defamation and handing me the exact evidence I needed to destroy them in civil court. While my legal team was finalizing the hostile takeover of their massive debts, I realized I needed physical boots on the ground. Financial audits tell you where the numbers go, but they do not tell you the human reality of the situation. I needed to know exactly how desperate they truly were. I contacted a top-tier private investigator named Lawrence. He was a former federal agent who specialized in corporate espionage and uncovering hidden assets for high-net-worth clients. I met him in a secure private booth at the back of my restaurant. I handed him a thick envelope containing his exorbitant retainer in cash and a piece of paper with 3 names on it: Brenda, Richard, and Dion. I need you to physically verify the exact status of my parents' estate, I told Lawrence, pushing the envelope across the table. And I need you to find out exactly what Dion is doing with his limited liability company. Do not look at the spreadsheets. Look at the streets. Find out where his money is actually bleeding out. Lawrence nodded, pocketing the envelope without looking inside. Give me 48 hours, he said. He delivered his findings in 36. Lawrence bypassed my security team and walked directly into my office, sliding a thick manila folder across my heavy oak desk. He did not look triumphant. He looked mildly disgusted. You were right to trust your instincts, Jada, Lawrence said, leaning back in the leather guest chair. They are not just broke. They are actively standing on the edge of a catastrophic legal cliff. I opened the folder and spread the high-resolution photographs across my desk. The pictures painted a pathetic, terrifying picture of a family completely consumed by greed and financial ruin. Let us start with your brother-in-law, Lawrence said, pointing to a photograph of a rundown strip mall on the outskirts of Atlanta. Dion corporate headquarters for Apex Prestige Holdings is a rented mailbox at a local shipping store. He has absolutely no staff, no office, no assets. The multifamily housing projects he claims to be developing do not exist. I drove to the addresses listed on his public filings. They are abandoned dirt lots filled with industrial trash. I stared at the photos of the empty lots. Dion was not a real estate developer. He was a total fraud running a classic Ponzi scheme using new investor money to pay off old debts. Where is the money actually going? I asked. Lawrence pulled out a stack of bank statements he had acquired through his less-than-legal channels. He is hemorrhaging cash at high-stakes underground poker games and offshore sports betting websites. He owes a very significant amount of money to some very dangerous people. He needs a massive cash injection by the end of this month, or his creditors are going to start breaking his legs instead of just calling his phone. The pieces instantly locked together. That was why they were so aggressively desperate to get Malik to wire the $500,000. Dion was not trying to build a legacy. He was trying to save his own life, and he was perfectly willing to use my teenage son trust fund to pay off his illegal gambling debts. And my parents, I asked, dreading the answer, but needing to know the absolute truth. Lawrence slid the final photograph across the desk. It was a close-up shot of the heavy mahogany front door of my childhood home. The massive brick colonial house where I had been raised. The house I had been thrown out of in the pouring rain. Taped directly to the center of the beautiful front door was a bright orange legal notice. They are in default on their primary mortgage and 2 additional lines of credit, Lawrence explained, his voice devoid of any sympathy. They leveraged the house to the absolute maximum limit to fund Kendra's lavish wedding and to cover Dion early business failures. The bank has officially initiated foreclosure proceedings. The property is scheduled to go to public auction in exactly 7 days. I looked down at the orange notice. My mother was spending her days crying on the internet, attacking my character and demanding respect, while an eviction notice was literally taped to her front door. They were projecting an image of absolute superiority, while their entire world was collapsing around them. The smear campaign, the ambushes, the fake medical emergencies. It was all a frantic, terrifying scramble for survival. They had pushed me to the absolute edge, believing that I was just a weak, vulnerable chef who would cave under public pressure. They had no idea that I was quietly purchasing the very ground they walked on. The stage was perfectly set. The trap was fully loaded. All I had to do now was wait for them to make their final, fatal mistake. I did not have to wait long for them to make their fatal move. 3 days after Lawrence handed me the photographs, a man in a cheap beige suit walked into the front lobby of Aura and handed the hostess a thick manila envelope with my legal name printed on the front. I was wiping down the expediting station when she brought it back to me. I tore open the heavy paper. My eyes scanned the bold black text at the top of the first page. It was a formal petition filed in the county family court. Dion had actually done it. He had taken his desperation to a judge. He had officially filed a fraudulent petition for grandparents' rights and a temporary financial conservatorship over my 19-year-old son. I read through the attached affidavits, and my blood turned to absolute ice. Dion had fabricated an entire alternate reality. He presented fake documents to the court, claiming I was financially incompetent and suffering from severe mental instability. He claimed I was actively manipulating Malik and siphoning funds from his late father's estate to pay off my own massive personal debts. The petition formally requested that Dion be appointed as the emergency financial conservator to protect Malik wealth from my supposed greed. It was a terrifying legal threat. In the American justice system, anyone can file a lawsuit if they have the filing fee and a willingness to lie. They were trying to use the courts to legally steal my son money under the guise of family protection. I immediately drove to my corporate holding office and walked straight into the main boardroom. I dropped the thick stack of lies onto the glass table in front of Harrison, my lead corporate attorney. Harrison read through the petition with a look of absolute professional disgust. "This is aggressive," he said, adjusting his glasses. "They are claiming emergency circumstances to bypass the standard waiting period. They secured a preliminary deposition for tomorrow morning. They want to get you on the record and intimidate you into signing a settlement before you can properly fight back." I sat down in the leather chair opposite him, crossing my arms. "I do not want a settlement, Harrison," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "I want them to hang themselves. Let us go to the deposition." The next morning, I walked into the sterile, brightly lit conference room of a downtown mediation center. The air smelled of cheap industrial cleaner and stale coffee. I intentionally wore the exact same faded gray sweater and cheap jeans I had worn to the coffee shop meeting. I instructed Harrison to stay behind at the firm and instead brought a junior associate who looked incredibly young and inexperienced. I needed my family to believe I was broke, terrified, and poorly represented. Malik walked in beside me wearing a simple collared shirt. He looked calm and completely unbothered by the heavy legal atmosphere. My family was already sitting on the opposite side of the long wooden table. Dion was wearing a flashy, tailored suit, looking incredibly smug, as if he had already won the lottery. Kendra sat next to him, glaring at me with undisguised contempt, while aggressively tapping her acrylic nails against the wood. Brenda and Richard sat at the far end, flanking a cheap, aggressive-looking attorney Dion had likely hired on a contingency fee. At the head of the table, a court reporter sat with her fingers resting silently on her stenotype machine, ready to capture every single word spoken. The deposition began with Dion attorney launching into a theatrical, highly aggressive monologue. He painted me as an absolute monster. He read from the fraudulent affidavits claiming I lived in squalor, that I was buried in credit card debt, and that I was emotionally abusing Malik to maintain control of his bank accounts. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap, playing the part of the overwhelmed, terrified single mother. I looked down at the table, letting my silence speak volumes. My junior attorney offered weak, generic objections exactly as I had instructed him to do, putting up almost no legal fight. The illusion of my weakness was a powerful drug to my family. They leaned forward in their chairs, feeding on my apparent defeat. They thought they were completely dominating the room and that I was seconds away from surrendering. But Dion attorney was moving too slowly for my father. Richard was a man who lived his entire life expecting immediate gratification, and the agonizingly slow legal process was grating on his nerves. He knew the bank was foreclosing on his mansion in less than a week. He did not have time for legal posturing or procedural questions. He needed the money immediately. As my junior attorney attempted to ask Dion a basic question about his limited liability company, Richard suddenly slammed his heavy fist down on the conference table. The loud crack echoed through the sterile room, making the court reporter physically jump in her seat. "Enough of this legal garbage!" Richard bellowed, his face turning a dark, dangerous shade of purple. He pointed a thick, shaking finger directly at me, completely ignoring his own attorney. Frantic gestures to remain quiet. "We are not sitting here all day playing games with this ungrateful girl," my father shouted, his voice vibrating with rage. "She is a liar. She has always been a liar. Tell the boy to sign the papers right now so we can take the money and go home." "Sir, I must advise you to let me handle this," Dion attorney pleaded, looking panicked, as his client ruined his carefully constructed legal narrative. Richard ignored him completely. His lifelong absolute hatred for me finally boiled over, shattering the carefully crafted illusion of the loving, concerned grandfather. He looked at me with a disgust so pure and profound it chilled the air in the room. "You were just a mistake," he snarled, his voice dripping with absolute venom. "You have always been a mistake. Kendra deserves that money for her children. She did things right. She married a good man. She built a real life. She needs that capital to protect our legacy. You do not deserve a single dime of it." The entire room fell into a dead, stunned silence. Only the rapid clicking of the stenotype machine echoed off the walls. Brenda buried her face in her hands, realizing the catastrophic error he had just made. Kendra went completely pale. Even Dion looked horrified, realizing that my father had just openly admitted their true motive on the official legal record. Richard had just confessed that this entire emergency conservatorship had absolutely nothing to do with protecting Malik. It was entirely about seizing his assets to fund Kendra lifestyle and save their own sinking ship. He had perfectly encapsulated the toxic, twisted dynamic that had defined my entire existence. Kendra was the golden child who deserved everything, even if she had to legally steal it. I was the scapegoat who deserved absolutely nothing, even if I had built it with my own bare hands. I slowly lifted my head and looked directly into my father's eyes. The court reporter machine clicked rapidly, capturing every single horrific syllable of his confession. I looked over at the court reporter. "Did you get all of that?" I asked her smoothly. The woman nodded, her eyes wide with shock. "Yes, ma'am," she whispered. My junior attorney finally sat up straight, dropping the timid, inexperienced act entirely. His posture shifted, and his voice suddenly rang with the sharp, lethal confidence of a top-tier corporate litigator. "Let the record reflect the witness' explicit admission of financial motive," he stated clearly, looking directly at Dion. Panicked attorney. "Furthermore, we are now formally agreeing to your discovery terms. We formally request that the petitioner Dion submit his complete corporate financial portfolio, including all audited tax returns and current debt liabilities, to this legal body to prove his fitness as a financial guardian. I looked across the table at Dion. He was sweating profusely, the smug smile completely wiped from his face. He had brought us to a legal deposition to force us to hand over the money. But by filing this fraudulent petition, he had legally opened his own entire life to discovery. "We will gladly review your business portfolio," Dion said, offering him a cold, dead smile. "Submit your financial records by tomorrow morning. We will see exactly who is financially incompetent." Dion attorney immediately scrambled to retract the petition, realizing the catastrophic mistake Richard had just made on the official court record. The lawyer began aggressively packing his briefcase frantically, whispering to Dion that they needed to withdraw the filing and walk away immediately before the discovery phase could legally bind them. I knew that if I maintained the cold, commanding energy I had just displayed, Dion would panic and run. He would withdraw the petition and disappear into the wind before I could officially secure his financial records. I needed him to formally submit his documents to the court so they would be legally actionable. So I instantly shifted gears. I let my shoulders slump heavily. I rubbed my temples, letting out a long, ragged sigh that sounded exactly like a woman who had been beaten down by years of single motherhood and relentless family toxicity. "I am just so incredibly tired of fighting," I whispered, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the laminate table and avoiding eye contact. I looked over at my junior attorney with a perfectly manufactured expression of total exhaustion. If Dion can truly prove he has the financial infrastructure to protect Malik, if he can prove he is a real businessman and not just trying to take this money to pay for my sister lifestyle, then fine. Show us the business portfolio. Let my lawyer look at his books. I just want my son to be safe. It was the absolute perfect bait. I was playing directly into their lifelong assumption that I was weak, easily intimidated, and desperate for an easy way out. Dion looked at my defeated posture and then looked at my young, seemingly inexperienced attorney. His massive narcissistic ego completely overrode his basic survival instincts. He actually thought he was dealing with a bargain bin attorney who would not know the difference between a legitimate corporate balance sheet and a hastily forged tax return. Dion straightened his expensive silk tie, his arrogant, smug smirk slowly returning to his face. He waved off his panicked attorney, dismissing the legal advice entirely. "My businesses are completely legitimate," Dion declared loudly, making sure the court reporter captured every single word. "I have absolutely nothing to hide from you or your little lawyer. I will have my accounting department send over the complete financial portfolio by tomorrow morning. You will see exactly what a real self-made entrepreneur looks like, Jada." The deposition concluded and my family walked out of the mediation center looking like royalty. They genuinely believed they had just successfully intimidated me into a total surrender. They thought handing over a few fake spreadsheets would be the final nail in my coffin. The next morning, a bonded courier arrived at the tiny decoy office I had rented for my junior attorney. The courier dropped off a massive, heavy cardboard box filled to the brim with glossy folders, thick stacks of bank statements, and bound tax returns. Dion had spent the entire night printing out every single piece of financial fiction he had ever created, trying to overwhelm my young lawyer with sheer volume. The junior attorney did not even open the box. He immediately carried it out the back door, placed it into the trunk of his car, and drove it directly to the towering glass skyscraper that housed my actual corporate legal team. I was waiting in the executive boardroom with Harrison, my lead corporate attorney, and 3 of his top forensic accountants. When the young associate placed the heavy box onto the mahogany table, the accountants descended on it like starving wolves. They did not see an intimidating mountain of paperwork. They saw a puzzle waiting to be violently ripped apart. For the next 8 hours, I sat in the corner of the boardroom drinking black coffee and watching the most ruthless financial minds in Atlanta dissect my brother-in-law's entire life. They pinned documents to the glass walls, drawing thick red lines between Dion's various shell companies and his fraudulent bank loans. It was an absolute masterpiece of forensic destruction. Harrison walked over to me late in the afternoon, holding a stack of highlighted tax returns. He took off his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He did not look triumphant. He looked genuinely shocked by the sheer magnitude of the stupidity sitting on the table. "I have been doing corporate litigation for 20 years, Jada," Harrison said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I have never seen someone voluntarily hand over a signed confession to federal crimes. This is not just a collection of inflated financial projections. This is a heavily documented trail of massive systemic wire fraud." "Show me," I said, standing up and walking over to the glass wall covered in documents. Harrison pointed to a series of bank statements originating from Apex Prestige Holdings. Dion claimed he was operating a highly successful real estate flipping business, but he submitted completely forged property appraisals to his commercial lenders. He artificially inflated the value of empty dirt lots by millions of dollars to secure massive construction loans. "And where did the loan money actually go?" I asked, tracing the red line connecting the bank to Dion's personal accounts. "It never went to construction," Harrison explained. He immediately transferred the loan disbursements into offshore accounts to cover his high-stakes gambling debts. To pay the monthly interest on those massive loans and avoid immediate default, he started soliciting private investors, promising them a 30% return. He is using the new investor money to pay the old bank loans. He is running a massive, unregulated Ponzi scheme. Harrison pulled up another document. This one had my parents' names printed clearly at the top. It was a secondary mortgage agreement. "It gets significantly worse," Harrison continued, his voice dropping to a grim tone. "When the new investor money dried up, Dion needed a quick infusion of cash to keep the banks off his back. He convinced your parents to take out a massive secondary mortgage on their primary estate. He acted as their broker, falsified their income to get the loan approved, and then funneled the equity directly into his failing shell company. He completely drained your parents' net worth. That is exactly why their house is going up for public auction next week. He bankrupted them." I stared at the signatures on the fraudulent loan applications. Dion had actually signed these documents. He had submitted them to a judge as proof of his financial competence. In his desperate, arrogant attempt to steal my son's $500,000 inheritance, Dion had voluntarily handed my legal team the exact murder weapon he used to destroy his own life. "We have enough evidence here to trigger a massive federal indictment," Harrison said, tapping the thick file. "If we hand this over to the Internal Revenue Service and the federal banking authorities, Dion is looking at a minimum of 15 years in a federal penitentiary. His creditors will completely seize whatever invisible assets he has left. Compile everything into a single, organized dossier," I instructed Harrison, keeping my voice perfectly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Do not file it with the court just yet. I want everything locked down tight. We are going to let him sweat." We had the ultimate leverage, but I knew the psychological warfare was just beginning. By handing over his records, Dion assumed my junior lawyer would be terrified by the complex corporate jargon and immediately advised me to settle. He expected a phone call that very afternoon begging for mercy and offering to wire Malik Trust Fund to make the lawsuit go away. But that phone call never came. I instructed my legal team to enforce a strict, absolute radio silence. For 48 hours, Dion heard absolutely nothing. The deafening silence began to slowly crack his arrogant facade. His creditors were still calling. The bank was still moving forward with the foreclosure on my parents' mansion. His window of survival was rapidly slamming shut, and his guaranteed payday was completely ignoring him. The silence drove him absolutely insane. It pushed him past the point of legal manipulation and right into the realm of desperate, reckless criminal action. He realized he could no longer wait for the court system to hand him the money. He needed to take it by force. He believed I was still just a struggling restaurant manager, keeping a private financial ledger in the back office of Aura. And that desperate delusion set the stage for the final catastrophic mistake of his life. The 48 hours of absolute silence completely shattered Dion. When a narcissist is denied their expected reaction, they do not self-reflect. They escalate. Dion was trapped in a rapidly shrinking box of his own making. The bank foreclosure on my parents' mansion was less than a week away. His illegal offshore creditors were breathing down his neck, demanding immediate payment for his massive gambling debts. And the emergency conservatorship he thought would be an easy cash grab had legally paralyzed him. He was desperate, and desperate people make incredibly stupid decisions. Because my family still firmly believed I was nothing more than a glorified kitchen manager, they assumed my entire life was contained within the four walls of Aura. They thought a struggling single mother would naturally hide her most sensitive documents in her workspace to keep them away from prying eyes at home. Dion convinced himself that I had physical control of Malik trust fund accounts. He believed that if he could just get his hands on my private financial ledger, he would find the routing numbers, the account passwords, or enough dirty secrets to blackmail me into dropping the discovery phase and wiring him the money. I knew they were going to try something reckless. You do not corner a wounded animal without expecting it to bite. So I prepared the environment. Aura is equipped with a state-of-the-art military-grade security system. We have biometric locks on the wine cellar, motion sensors in the dining room, and high-definition cameras covering every single square inch of the property. But on Tuesday night, I instructed David, my head of security, to make a slight, highly specific adjustment. I had him remotely disable the perimeter alarm on the heavy steel delivery door in the back alley. I also had him leave the door to the secondary floor manager office completely unlocked. We kept the interior motion sensors active, but routed the alerts silently directly to my personal tablet and David phone. At 2 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday, my tablet lit up with a silent notification. I was sitting in the living room of my downtown penthouse wrapped in a silk robe, sipping a glass of sparkling water. I tapped the screen, opening the live security feed. The high-definition night vision cameras illuminated the dark alley behind the restaurant. I watched as a sleek black luxury sedan rolled to a stop near the dumpsters. The headlights cut off. Two figures stepped out into the damp night air. It was Dion and my sister Kendra. Dion was wearing a dark hoodie pulled up over his head, trying to look like a professional burglar, but failing miserably in his expensive designer sneakers. Kendra was dressed in all black, holding a large designer tote bag, nervously looking up and down the empty alleyway. They crept toward the steel delivery door. I watched in crystal clear high definition as Dion pulled a short iron crowbar from his jacket. He jammed it into the doorframe and pushed. Because David had disengaged the heavy magnetic deadbolt, the door popped open with almost zero resistance. Dion stumbled forward, surprised by how easy it was. He looked over his shoulder, gesturing for Kendra to follow him inside. They stepped into the massive stainless steel commercial kitchen. The ambient light from the street lamps outside cast long, distorted shadows across the prep stations. I switched the camera feed to the interior kitchen view, activating the highly sensitive audio recording microphones hidden in the ceiling tiles. "It smells like dead fish and bleach in here," Kendra whispered loudly, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. She pinched her nose, looking around the pristine kitchen with absolute disgust. "Let us just find her little office and get out of here, Dion. My shoes are getting ruined on this greasy floor. Shut up and keep your voice down," Dion hissed, grabbing her arm and pulling her away from the main cooking line. "She is a manager. Managers always have their offices in the back, near the loading docks. We find her desk. We find the bank books. If she has $500,000 sitting in that boy trust fund, she has a physical ledger. People like her do not trust banks. They write everything down." They moved awkwardly through the kitchen, completely unaware that they were being tracked by 4 different cameras. They bypassed the walk-in freezers and headed straight for the narrow hallway that housed the administrative offices. They ignored the heavy locked mahogany door that led to my actual executive suite, assuming it belonged to the wealthy owner they thought I worked for. Instead, they made a beeline for the small, cramped floor manager office right at the end of the hall. The door was unlocked, just as I had arranged. Dion pushed it open and flicked on a small battery-powered flashlight. The office was a perfect decoy. I had spent an hour earlier that evening dressing the room to look exactly like the tragic, desperate life they imagined I lived. I hung a cheap, faded cardigan over the back of the swivel chair. I placed a framed photograph of Malik from his high school graduation on the scuffed laminate desk. I scattered past due utility bills and fake credit card collection notices across the keyboard to paint a picture of severe financial distress. Kendra walked in and immediately began tearing the place apart. The golden child who had never worked a hard day in her life showed absolutely no hesitation in destroying someone else's workspace. She swept her arm across the desk, knocking the framed photo of her own nephew straight into the trash can. She pulled out the top drawers, dumping pens, paperclips, and employee scheduling files onto the floor. "Look at this," Kendra sneered, picking up one of the fake collection notices. "She is drowning in credit card debt. She owes $4,000 to a tire company. I told you she was broke, Dion. I told you she was probably stealing the boy money just to keep the lights on." "Keep looking," Dion commanded frantically, shining his flashlight into the dark corners of the small room. He dropped to his knees, pulling out the bottom filing drawer. It was filled with old inventory manifests and vendor receipts. He violently ripped the folders out, tossing them over his shoulder in a desperate frenzy. "Where is the ledger? Where does she keep the banking details?" He pulled the drawer entirely off its metal tracks, letting it crash loudly onto the linoleum floor. And there, taped carefully to the very bottom of the empty drawer cavity, was exactly what I wanted him to find. Dion let out a sharp, breathless gasp. "Got it," he whispered. He reached in and pulled out a heavy, dark, leather-bound book. It looked incredibly official. Right next to it was a small silver flash drive. Dion stood up, placing the flashlight in his mouth so he could use both hands to flip open the heavy leather cover. I leaned closer to my tablet screen, watching his eyes widen as he scanned the pages. The ledger was a meticulously crafted piece of fiction created by my forensic accountants. It contained pages of fake transaction logs outlining massive illegal withdrawals from a trust fund account. It listed offshore routing numbers, fake passwords, and a detailed, completely fabricated timeline of Jada secretly funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay off black market debts. It was designed to look like a signed confession of massive financial fraud. "Oh my God," Dion breathed, pulling the flashlight from his mouth. A massive, triumphant smile stretched across his face. He looked like a man who had just struck gold. "Look at this, Kendra. She is embezzling the money. She is legally robbing her own son blind. The account numbers, the routing codes, everything is right here." Kendra rushed over, leaning in to look at the pages. Her eyes lit up with malicious, vindictive joy. "She is going to prison." Kendra laughed, a harsh, cruel sound that the microphones picked up with perfect clarity. "We have her, Dion. We have the absolute proof. She either signs the check over to your company tomorrow, or we hand this book straight to the police and have her arrested for grand theft. They will take Malik away from her, and we will get full control of the estate." They were standing directly in the center of the room. Directly above their heads, disguised flawlessly inside the plastic casing of a standard smoke detector, was a 4K resolution camera with a direct line of sight to their faces. They were looking right into the lens, holding the stolen property, actively plotting extortion and blackmail on a crystal-clear audio feed. "Grab the flash drive too," Dion instructed, shoving the heavy leather ledger into Kendra designer tote bag. "It probably has the digital backups. We take it all. We own her now. She is going to get on her knees and beg us to take that money." They turned off the flashlight and scrambled out of the ruined office, leaving the floor covered in shredded paper and broken drawers. They jogged back through the dark stainless steel kitchen, slipping out the steel delivery door and pulling it shut behind them. I watched the exterior alley camera as they practically skipped back to their luxury sedan. They climbed inside, and the brake lights flared as they sped off into the night, entirely convinced they had just executed the perfect heist. I sat back against the plush cushions of my sofa and took a slow, satisfying sip of my sparkling water. I tapped the screen, saving the high-definition video and audio files directly to 3 separate encrypted cloud servers. The crime of commercial burglary was officially complete. They had crossed the point of no return. By breaking into my property and stealing what they believed was my financial data, they had escalated their civil fraud into a severe criminal felony. They thought they had stolen my darkest secrets. They thought they possessed the ultimate leverage to extort $500,000 from my son and save their pathetic sinking empire. They had absolutely no idea that I had just handed them the rope they were going to use to hang themselves in front of the entire world. The trap had snapped shut, and it was finally time to bleed them dry. The next morning, I arrived at my office just before 8 o'clock. The cleaning crew had already been through the administrative hallway, fixing the broken drawers and sweeping up the shredded paper Dion and Kendra had left behind. I sat at my massive oak desk holding a fresh cup of dark roast coffee, simply watching my phone. I knew the call was coming. They had spent the entire night looking over the fake financial ledger, convinced they had just uncovered the greatest scandal of the century. They thought they possessed the ultimate weapon, and narcissists simply cannot resist the urge to gloat. At exactly 8:15, my private cell phone began to vibrate against the wood surface of my desk. The caller identification displayed my mother name. I took a deep breath, centering myself. I needed to deliver the performance of a lifetime. I pressed the answer button and brought the phone to my ear, but I did not say a word. "It is over, Jada." Brenda said, her voice dripping with such venomous triumph it practically oozed through the speaker. She did not say hello. She did not ask how I was doing. She launched straight into the execution. "Your little house of cards has completely collapsed. We know absolutely everything." "What are you talking about?" I asked, injecting the perfect amount of hesitant confusion into my voice. "Do not play stupid with me." Brenda snapped, a sharp, cruel laugh escaping her lips. "Dion found your little black book. We know you are embezzling money from Malik Trust Fund. We saw the offshore routing numbers. We saw the thousands of dollars you are siphoning off to pay your massive personal debts. You are a complete fraud, Jada. You are robbing your own flesh and blood to fund your pathetic existence." I let out a sharp manufactured gasp. I knocked my heavy ceramic coffee mug against the edge of my desk, making a loud clattering sound to simulate sheer panic. "You broke into my office," I stammered, forcing my voice to tremble. "You broke into the restaurant. We did what we had to do to protect our family." Brenda shot back, entirely unbothered by her admission of a felony. "And it is a good thing we did. You are a disgusting criminal. I always knew you were rotten inside, but stealing from your own child is a new low even for you." I began to breathe heavily, pulling the phone slightly away from my mouth so the microphone would pick up the ragged, shallow sounds of a woman entering a full-blown panic attack. "Please," I begged, letting my voice crack under the simulated pressure. "Please, you do not understand. You do not know the whole story. Do not do this." My begging acted like pure oxygen to her massive narcissistic ego. For 19 years she had wanted to break me. She wanted me on my knees pleading for her mercy, completely dependent on her authority. Hearing me hyperventilate over the phone gave her an intense, sickening sense of absolute power. "Oh, I understand perfectly." Brenda gloated, her tone thick with arrogant superiority. "You thought you could disrespect us. You thought you could parade us around in front of your little restaurant friends and treat us like garbage. Well, the tables have turned, Jada. I hold your entire life in my hands right now." "What do you want?" I whispered, sounding utterly defeated. "I want justice," Brenda proclaimed. "But more importantly, Dion needs his investment capital. So here is exactly what is going to happen. You are going to go to the bank and you are going to secure a cashier check for $500,000. You will make it out directly to Apex Prestige Holdings." $500,000, I cried, simulating absolute terror. "I cannot get that much money. I do not have access to those kinds of funds." "You are crazy." "Do not raise your voice to me," Brenda hissed, the viciousness returning instantly. "You will find the money, Jada. You will drain that trust fund completely dry if you have to. because if you do not hand that check over to Dion by this Friday at noon, I am going to destroy you." She took a breath and laid out her extortion plan with terrifying precision. "If we do not have the money by Friday, I am going to call the owners of your little restaurant. I am going to send them copies of your fraudulent ledger and tell them their kitchen manager is a degenerate thief. They will fire you on the spot. Then I am going to call the local news stations and hand over the documents to the press. Everyone in Atlanta will know exactly what you are. And while you are dealing with the police, Dion will take this ledger straight to the family court judge. We will file for emergency full custody of Malik. You will go to federal prison, and you will never see your son again." The legal weight of what she was doing was staggering. In her desperate attempt to secure the money, she had just clearly and explicitly committed felony extortion and blackmail over a recorded telecommunications line. I had the entire conversation recording on a secondary device on my desk. "Please, Mom," I sobbed deliberately, using the word I knew would feed her delusion of control. "Please do not take my son away. Please do not ruin my job. I worked so hard to get this position. If I get fired, I will be back on the street. I have nowhere else to go. Now I am your mom." Brenda mocked, her voice cold and completely devoid of any maternal instinct. "Funny how quickly your arrogant attitude vanishes when you realize you are nothing. You have always been nothing, Jada. You are a mistake who got lucky. Now you are going to pay the toll for disrespecting this family." I squeezed my eyes shut, focusing entirely on maintaining my panicked breathing. "Friday is too soon," I pleaded desperately. "The bank needs time to process a withdrawal that large. There are security holds. There is paperwork. Please give me until next week. You have until Friday at noon." Brenda commanded, ignoring my pleas entirely. "You will meet us at the main branch of the downtown corporate bank. You will bring the check and you will sign the official transfer documents releasing the funds to Dion. If you try to run, if you try to call the police, or if you try to stall us for even one more minute, I will ruin your life before the sun goes down. Do you understand me?" "I understand," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I will get the money. Just please do not destroy my career." "See?" Brenda said, letting out a dark, satisfied chuckle. "Was that so hard? You finally learned how to be an obedient daughter. We will see you on Friday, Jada. Do not be late." The line went completely dead. I slowly pulled the phone away from my ear. I took a deep, steadying breath, dropping the panicked facade instantly. The heavy trembling in my chest vanished, replaced by a cold, calculated calm. I looked down at the recording device on my desk, observing the audio waveform saving to the encrypted hard drive. Extortion, blackmail, grand theft, wire fraud. They had checked every single box on the federal indictment checklist. I picked up my office phone and dialed Harrison, my lead corporate attorney. He answered immediately. "The bait was taken," I told him, leaning back in my leather executive chair. "Brenda just issued the ransom demand. $500,000 by this Friday at noon at the downtown bank. She threatened to destroy my career and take custody of Malik if I do not comply." Harrison let out a low whistle over the line. "She just handed you a guaranteed conviction for felony extortion, Jada. Are you absolutely sure you want to proceed with the in-person meeting? We have enough evidence to send the authorities to their house right now and have them all arrested before lunch." "No," I said firmly, my eyes fixed on the Atlanta skyline outside my office window. "Arresting them quietly in their living room is entirely too merciful. They tried to publicly humiliate me in my own restaurant. They tried to extort my teenage son on his college campus. They want a public spectacle. They want an audience to witness their grand victory." I smiled, a cold, hollow smile that did not reach my eyes. "So we are going to give them an audience, Harrison. Prepare the final acquisition documents for Dion debt and the foreclosure deed for my parents' house. Have the security footage from the break-in queued up on the boardroom projector. I want every single member of our litigation team in that room on Friday." "Understood," Jada, Harrison replied, his voice ringing with fierce professional anticipation. "The trap is set." I hung up the phone. Brenda wanted to break me. She wanted to see me lose everything I had built. She thought Friday was going to be her crowning achievement. She had absolutely no idea she was walking into an execution. Friday morning arrived with a crisp, cool breeze blowing off the Atlanta skyline. I woke up long before the sun rose, feeling a profound sense of absolute clarity. For 19 years, I had carried the heavy, suffocating weight of my family rejection. Today, I was finally going to set it down. I walked into my massive walk-in closet and completely bypassed the faded jeans and cheap gray sweaters I had been wearing all week. I was done playing the victim. I was done shrinking myself to make them feel powerful. I reached for a bespoke tailored suit in a deep, striking emerald green. The fabric was Italian silk and wool cut perfectly to my exact measurements. I paired it with a crisp, white silk blouse and a pair of classic black stiletto heels. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, polished bun and applied a flawless layer of subtle, powerful makeup. When I looked in the full-length mirror, I did not see the terrified 16-year-old girl shivering in the rain. I saw a self-made titan. I saw a woman who owned the ground she stood on. Malik met me in the kitchen. He was dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, looking every bit the brilliant young executive he was training to become. He poured a cup of coffee and leaned against the granite island, studying my face. "You look like you are going to war," he said, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. "I am not going to war, Malik," I replied, taking the coffee from him. "The war is already over. We are just going to sign the peace treaty." We drove downtown in my armored luxury sport utility vehicle, leaving the old commuter sedan parked in the garage. The city traffic parted around us as we navigated toward the towering glass and steel structure of the main corporate bank. This was not a regular retail branch where people deposited their weekly paychecks. This was a private wealth management center dealing exclusively with high net worth individuals and massive corporate holding accounts. My accounts. We walked through the heavy revolving doors and stepped into the sprawling lobby. The floors were polished white marble and the air smelled of expensive air purifiers and fresh-cut orchids. It was completely silent, except for the soft clicking of leather shoes and the hushed murmurs of wealth managers speaking with their elite clients. And then I heard it. The loud, grating sound of my mother voice cutting through the sophisticated silence like a rusty saw. I paused near a massive marble pillar and observed the scene. My family had completely taken over a sleek leather waiting area near the front windows. Dion was pacing back and forth, tapping his expensive watch, looking completely manic with anticipation. Kendra sat on the edge of a leather sofa, clutching her designer tote bag against her chest. The bag I knew contained my fake financial ledger. Richard sat rigidly in a high-backed chair, trying to look like a commanding patriarch, but his eyes kept nervously darting toward the security guards. But the most pathetic sight was Brenda. She was not just waiting for her money, she was holding court. My mother had actually brought two of her wealthy country club friends to the bank. Two older women draped in cashmere and pearls were sitting next to her, nodding sympathetically as Brenda put on a theatrical display. She was leaning forward, speaking loudly enough for anyone within a 50-foot radius to hear her tragic tale. "It has been an absolute nightmare," Brenda sighed, dramatically pressing a manicured hand to her chest. "But as a mother, you never stop trying to save your children, even when they turn out to be deeply disturbed. I had to step in. I had to force her hand to protect my grandson from her reckless spending. It is a terrible burden, but family always comes first." One of her friends patted her arm. "You are a saint, Brenda. To endure so much disrespect and still step up to save the boy legacy, it is truly inspiring." I felt a cold, hard laugh build in my chest. Brenda was so deeply addicted to her own false image that she could not resist bringing an audience to witness what she thought would be her ultimate triumph. She brought her country club friends to watch her break her rebellious daughter and secure $500,000 for her golden child. She wanted them to see me grovel. She wanted them to witness my complete public surrender so she could play the magnanimous, forgiving savior. I stepped out from behind the marble pillar and walked directly across the open lobby toward them. My high heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, echoing with a steady, commanding rhythm. Malik walked right beside me, his posture perfectly straight. As we approached, Kendra was the first one to spot us. She opened her mouth to sneer at my usual cheap clothes, but the insult completely died in her throat. Her eyes widened as she took in the bespoke suit, the flawless hair, and the undeniable aura of wealth radiating from me. She looked down at my shoes and then back up to my face, her brain completely failing to process the visual contradiction. Dion stopped his frantic pacing. He stared at me, his jaw going slightly slack. This was not the broken, terrified kitchen manager he had spoken to on the phone. Brenda looked up and her carefully rehearsed expression of tragic sorrow slipped for just a fraction of a second. But her narcissistic programming quickly overrode her confusion. She immediately stood up, smoothing down her dress, and turning to her two friends with a tight, victorious smile. "And here she is," Brenda announced, gesturing toward me as if I were a poorly behaved dog she had successfully trained. "Girls, this is Jada. I told you she would finally come to her senses once I put my foot down." The two country club women looked at me with varying degrees of pity and condescension. "It is so nice to finally meet you, Jada," one of them said, offering a tight little smile. "Your mother has been so incredibly worried about your situation. We are just so glad you decided to do the right thing and hand the finances over to the professionals." I did not acknowledge the women. I did not even look at them. I kept my eyes entirely locked on Brenda. "You wanted an audience, Mom?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm and completely devoid of the panic she expected. "I wanted witnesses," Brenda hissed under her breath, taking a step closer to me so her friends could not hear her vicious tone. "I brought them here so you would not try anything stupid. You know how much I value my reputation. You are going to sign that check, hand it to Dion, and walk away quietly. If you make a scene, I will destroy you right here in front of everyone. Do you have the cashier check?" "I have everything you deserve," I replied simply. Dion stepped forward. His eyes locked entirely on Malik. He was practically vibrating with greed. "Let us just get this over with," he demanded, rubbing his hands together. "We have the wire transfer forms ready. We just need to go up to the teller and get the funds released into the Apex Prestige Holdings account." "We are not doing this at a public teller window," I said, dismissing Dion with a slight wave of my hand. "This transaction requires a private space." Before Dion could argue, a set of heavy glass doors on the far side of the lobby opened. A tall, distinguished man in a dark, tailored suit walked out holding a leather folio. It was Mr. Montgomery, the senior vice president of the Private Wealth Management Division. He scanned the lobby, spotted me, and immediately walked over with a warm, professional smile. Brenda saw the senior bank executive approaching and immediately puffed out her chest. She stepped in front of me, blocking my path, assuming the executive was coming to greet her. "Hello," Brenda said, putting on her most sophisticated voice. "We are the family completing the massive $500,000 corporate transfer today. We requested private service." Mr. Montgomery completely bypassed her. He smoothly sidestepped Brenda, outstretching his hand directly toward me. "Good morning, Jada," he said, his voice filled with genuine respect. "Your legal team is already waiting upstairs in the executive boardroom. Everything has been prepared exactly to your specifications. Shall I escort your guests up?" My family stood completely frozen. Brenda's hand was still hanging awkwardly in the air. Dion blinked rapidly, looking back and forth between the senior vice president and me. Kendra clutched her tote bag tighter, a sudden look of genuine panic flashing across her face. They could not understand why the senior executive of a massive corporate bank was speaking to a disgraced kitchen manager with such absolute deference. I turned back to my mother, offering a smile that was colder than ice. "Yes, Mr. Montgomery," I said, never breaking eye contact with Brenda. "Please escort my guests to the boardroom. We have a lot of paperwork to review." Brenda swallowed hard, her confident facade beginning to crack at the edges. She looked at her two country club friends who were now watching the exchange with intense curiosity. "Do not worry, girls," Brenda said, forcing a nervous laugh. "Just a little administrative VIP treatment. Wait right here. We will be down in just a few minutes to celebrate." They followed Mr. Montgomery toward the private elevators. Dion walked closely behind Richard, whispering frantically in his ear. Kendra stayed close to her mother, looking around the massive, expensive bank as if the walls were slowly closing in on her. They were walking into the belly of the beast, completely blind to the fact that I was the one who owned the cage. We stepped into the private elevator, and the heavy steel doors slid shut completely, cutting them off from the public lobby. The smooth, silent ride to the top floor felt like a countdown. They thought they were riding up to collect their ultimate prize. They had no idea they were about to step into a masterpiece of absolute ruin. The heavy steel doors of the private elevator slid open with a soft chime, revealing the top floor of the Corporate Wealth Management Center. This was a sanctuary reserved exclusively for the most powerful players in the city. The entire floor was a masterpiece of modern architecture featuring floor-to-ceiling glass walls that offered an unobstructed panoramic view of the sprawling Atlanta skyline. The carpets were thick enough to absorb any sound, and the air was perfectly climate-controlled. My family stepped out of the elevator and immediately tried to mask their awe with aggressive entitlement. They walked down the wide corridor, acting as if they owned the entire building. Mr. Montgomery led them toward the primary executive boardroom, a massive glass-walled space featuring a 30-foot solid mahogany table surrounded by plush leather ergonomic chairs. I was standing in the adjacent private observation suite, separated by a wall of smart glass that allowed me to see and hear everything in the boardroom without them knowing I was there. Malik stood beside me with Harrison and my two other senior corporate litigators. We watched them enter the room, and it was like watching a group of hyenas wander into a lion den. Richard immediately marched to the very head of the mahogany table. He pulled out the largest leather chair and sat down heavily, claiming the position of absolute authority. He leaned back, resting his hands on his stomach, looking incredibly pleased with himself. Brenda sat to his right, placing her outdated designer purse on the polished wood. Kendra took the seat next to her mother, proudly placing the large tote bag containing my stolen fake ledger squarely on the table like a hard-won trophy. Dion remained standing, pacing near the massive glass windows, trying to look like a visionary chief executive observing his empire. An administrative assistant, a young woman named Clara, walked into the boardroom holding an electronic tablet to take their refreshment orders. She offered a polite, professional smile. "Can I get anyone a beverage while we wait for the meeting to commence?" Clara asked. Brenda looked the young woman up and down with blatant condescension. "I will take an espresso," Brenda demanded, waving her hand dismissively. "And make sure it is actually hot. The last time I had coffee in a bank, it tasted like dirty dishwater." Richard snapped his fingers, pointing at the assistant. "Bring me a sparkling water. Imported only. None of that cheap domestic garbage. We are closing a very large corporate transaction today, and I expect proper service." "Right away, Sir," Clara replied, her customer service smile never wavering as she tapped the orders into her tablet. Kendra pulled out her smartphone, holding it up high to take a selfie with the spectacular city view in the background. She was completely oblivious to the serious legal nature of the room. "Make sure you bring some pastries too," Kendra added without looking up from her phone screen. "My sister is supposed to be bringing us a very large check, and she works in a kitchen, so she probably did not have time to eat today. She is always a complete mess." Dion chuckled, walking over to the table and leaning heavily on the back of his chair. "You do not have to worry about my sister-in-law," Dion told the assistant, puffing out his chest. She finally realized she was in way over her head. "We had to step in and take control of the family estate. You know how it is with these low-level workers. You give them a little bit of responsibility and they completely lose their minds. She is just a glorified fry cook. We are the ones who actually understand high-level finance." The utter delusion was staggering. They were sitting in a boardroom that cost more per square foot then their entire foreclosed mansion demanding coffee from a woman who managed multi-million-dollar portfolios and openly mocking the person who actually paid her salary. They were so deeply intoxicated by their own perceived power that they had completely abandoned basic human decency. I looked at Harrison. He was holding 3 thick black leather-bound dossiers. He adjusted his suit jacket and offered me a grim professional nod. "It is time," I said. I walked over to the heavy double doors connecting the observation suite to the main corridor. I pushed them open and stepped out. Malik flanked my right side, and Harrison, along with my 2 other feared corporate litigators, flanked my left. We moved together as a single impenetrable unit. The soft clicking of my black stiletto heels echoed sharply against the marble floor of the corridor. As I approached the glass walls of the boardroom, Dion caught the movement out of the corner of his eye. He turned his head expecting to see the assistant returning with his coffee. Instead, he saw me. I pushed the heavy glass boardroom door open and stepped inside. The shift in the atmosphere was instantaneous and violent. The arrogant chatter completely died. I was not wearing the stained white chef coat. I was not wearing the faded gray sweater or the cheap denim jeans they had seen me in all week. I was wearing a bespoke thousands of dollars emerald green tailored suit. The Italian silk and wool fabric draped flawlessly over my frame, projecting an aura of absolute uncompromising authority. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, polished style. My makeup was sharp and flawless. I did not look like a terrified single mother begging for her career. I looked exactly like the corporate titan who owned the ground they were sitting on. Malik stood right beside me. He had completely dropped the polite, naive college student persona. He stood tall, his shoulders squared, his expression carved from solid stone. He looked like a young king stepping into his courtroom. Behind us, Harrison and the 2 litigators entered the room carrying the heavy black dossiers. They wore dark, immaculate suits and carried themselves with the lethal, quiet confidence of men who destroyed massive corporations before lunch. Brenda's mouth fell open. She stared at my designer suit, and then at the 3 ruthless lawyers standing behind me. Her brain violently rejected the visual information it was receiving. She blinked rapidly, gripping the edge of the mahogany table as if the room had suddenly tilted. Richard slowly sat forward, pulling his hands off his stomach. The arrogant patriarch posture completely vanished, replaced by deep, profound confusion. Dion's face went completely pale. He was the only one in the room who actually recognized the danger. He looked at Harrison's face, and then looked at the discreet gold lapel pin on Harrison's suit jacket. It was the insignia of the most expensive, most aggressive corporate litigation firm in the entire state of Georgia. Dion realized instantly that these were not cheap public defenders. These were apex predators. "What is this?" Brenda finally managed to stammer, her voice lacking its usual shrill confidence. "Why are you dressed like that, Jada? And who are these people? I told you no tricks. I told you to bring the cashier check and nothing else." I walked slowly to the opposite end of the long mahogany table. I did not sit down. I rested my hands flat on the polished wood and leaned forward, fixing my mother with a stare so cold it could freeze boiling water. "I brought exactly what you demanded, Brenda," I said, my voice ringing with crystal-clear authority. "I brought the paperwork." Kendra tried to recover the offensive. She reached into her designer tote bag and slammed the stolen heavy leather ledger onto the table. It made a loud, heavy thud. "Do not try to intimidate us with your rented suit and your hired actors," Kendra sneered, her voice trembling slightly despite her aggressive words. "We have the ledger, Jada. We have the absolute proof of your embezzlement. You are going to sign that $500,000 check over to Dion right now, or I am calling the police and having you arrested for grand theft." Harrison stepped forward, sliding one of the thick black dossiers onto the table. He did not yell. He did not raise his voice. He spoke with the terrifying calm of a man dropping a guillotine blade. "You are perfectly welcome to call the police," Harrison said, smoothing his hand over the cover of the dossier. "In fact, we highly encourage it. It will save the federal authorities the trouble of tracking you down when we hand over the high-definition security footage of you and your husband breaking into a commercial property and committing felony burglary." Dion's legs practically gave out. He grabbed the back of his leather chair to keep from collapsing onto the floor. Security footage, he choked out, all the color draining from his face. Kendra froze, her hand still resting on the stolen ledger. "That office was a decoy, Kendra," I said, standing perfectly straight and looking my sister dead in the eyes. "The ledger you are holding is a completely fabricated prop created by my forensic accounting team. You broke into my building. You stole my property. And you spent the last 48 hours using that stolen property to commit federal extortion across telecommunication lines. You did not trap me. You documented your own felonies." The absolute silence that followed was deafening. The grand royal arrival they had envisioned was completely shattered. They were sitting in a glass box entirely surrounded by the very people they had tried to destroy, and the execution was just beginning. Dion shook his head violently, refusing to accept the reality of the situation. "You are bluffing," he spat, pointing a shaking finger at Harrison. "There is no security footage. We checked the office. It was completely empty. You are just trying to scare us because you know we have you cornered. I want the $500,000 cashier check right now. Jada or I am walking straight out of this building and calling the press. I will call the police and tell them you are stealing from your own son." I let out a slow, soft laugh. The sound seemed to echo off the glass walls of the boardroom, completely unnerving them. I stepped away from the window and walked directly to the center of the massive mahogany table. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy dossier bound in premium black leather. I dropped it onto the table right next to the stolen fake ledger Kendra had brought. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. "You still do not understand, do you?" I asked, looking directly at my mother. "You spent 19 years convincing yourself that I was a worthless failure because it made you feel better about throwing me away. You looked at my white chef coat and you saw a struggling servant. You looked at my old commuter car and you saw a desperate single mother drowning in debt. You never once stopped to ask yourself who actually owned the restaurant you were standing in." Brenda stared at me, her jaw tight. "You manage the kitchen?" she hissed, stubbornly clinging to her delusion. "Do not stand here and act like you are something special. You flip steaks for a living." "I do not manage the kitchen, Brenda," I corrected her, my voice dropping to a low, deadly calm. "I own the kitchen. I own Aura. I own the 11 other high-end restaurants operating across the state under my hospitality group. I am the chief executive officer and sole founder of a corporate empire with a net worth exceeding $40 million. I paused, letting the massive number hang in the heavy air. I leaned forward, resting my palms on the cool wood of the table. "And as for this bank we are standing in right now," I continued, watching the blood completely drain from Richard's face. "You demanded private service because you think you are wealthy. But the only reason Mr. Montgomery personally escorted you up the elevator is because my holding company owns this entire skyscraper. I am his landlord. I own the walls around you." Kendra shot up out of her chair, the heavy leather scraping loudly against the floor. "Liar!" she shrieked, her voice breaking into a hysterical pitch. "You are a liar. You do not have $40 million. You were crying on the phone yesterday. You begged Mom not to ruin your life. You said you were going to be homeless." I smiled, a cold, empty smile. "I gave you exactly what you wanted, Kendra. I gave you the pathetic, desperate sister you needed to feel superior. I simulated a panic attack because I knew it would make you arrogant enough to show up here today and hand me your head on a silver platter." I stood up straight and looked over at Harrison. "Show them," I commanded. Harrison did not say a word. He simply picked up a small remote control from the table and pressed a single button. The heavy, motorized blackout blinds slowly descended over the floor to ceiling glass walls, plunging the boardroom into shadows. A massive projection screen silently dropped from the ceiling at the far end of the room. A state-of-the-art 4K resolution projector hummed to life. The screen illuminated the dark room. Suddenly, there was Dion and Kendra standing in the middle of the fake floor manager office inside Aura. The high-definition night vision camera captured every single detail of their faces. The audio played through the hidden boardroom speakers with terrifying, absolute clarity. My family sat frozen in their leather chairs, forced to watch their own criminal burglary play out like a high-budget movie. They heard Kendra complaining about the smell of the kitchen. They watched Dion rip the bottom drawer off its tracks. They saw the exact moment Dion found the fake ledger and placed the flashlight in his mouth. And then the audio of their extortion plot filled the silent boardroom. They heard Kendra cruel, vindictive laughter. "She is going to prison," Kendra's voice echoed from the speakers. "We have her, Dion. We have the absolute proof. She either signs the check over to your company tomorrow, or we hand this book straight to the police and have her arrested for grand theft. They will take Malik away from her, and we will get full control of the estate." The video ended and the projector screen went black. Harrison pressed the remote again, and the blackout blinds smoothly retracted, flooding the room with bright morning sunlight once more. Dion looked like he was about to vomit. He stumbled backward away from the mahogany table, his eyes wide with sheer animal panic. The absolute certainty of federal prison stared him right in the face. He had broken into a commercial property, stolen corporate documents, and actively plotted extortion on camera. There was no legal defense. There was no clever loophole. He was completely trapped. But a desperate man is a dangerous man. Dion wiped a layer of cold sweat from his forehead. His breathing was ragged and shallow. He looked around the room, frantically searching for any possible exit strategy. He locked eyes with Malik, and a sudden vicious snarl twisted his features. "You think you have won," Dion shouted, pointing a trembling finger at my son. "You think a little video is going to stop me? I still filed the emergency conservatorship. I still submitted the paperwork to the family court judge. I am the petitioner. I have the legal right to audit that trust fund. You cannot just magically erase the lawsuit, Jada. I will drag you through civil court for years. I will bleed your massive hospitality group dry with legal fees. I am still going to take that boy money." Malik stepped away from my side. He moved to the front of the table, standing directly opposite his grandfather and his uncle. He unbuttoned his suit jacket with a smooth, practiced motion, looking entirely unbothered by Dion's screaming threat. "You are not going to drag anyone through court, Dion," Malik said, his voice projecting the calm, heavy authority of a seasoned corporate raider. "Because you no longer have the financial standing to file a lawsuit against anyone. You do not have a company. You do not have assets. You only have massive, crippling debt." Malik reached out and picked up one of the black dossiers Harrison had prepared. He opened it and began reading the devastating facts of Dion's miserable life into the official record. "Your limited liability company, Apex Prestige Holdings, is nothing but a fraudulent shell," Malik stated, looking directly into Dion's panicked eyes. "You have 0 active development projects. You have submitted forged property appraisals to commercial lenders to secure construction loans, and you funneled that capital into offshore accounts to cover your severe sports gambling addictions. You are running an unregulated Ponzi scheme using private investor funds to pay the interest on your fraudulent bank loans." Brenda let out a small, horrified gasp, turning to stare at her son-in-law. Richard gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles turning completely white. They had absolutely no idea the extent of Dion's financial crimes. They thought he was just experiencing a temporary cash flow problem. "But that is not even the most tragic part," Malik continued, his voice devoid of any pity. "When your scheme began to collapse, Dion, you convinced my grandparents to take out a massive secondary mortgage on their primary estate. You acted as their broker, falsified their income, and drained their entire net worth to save your own sinking ship. You completely bankrupted them." Richard shot out of his chair. He lunged across the table, grabbing Dion by the collar of his expensive suit. "Is that true?" Richard roared, spittle flying from his lips. "Did you steal the equity from my house, you worthless piece of garbage? Tell me the truth." Dion shoved Richard away, stumbling back against the glass wall. "It was an investment," Dion stammered defensively, holding his hands up. It was supposed to bounce back. The market turned against me. I was going to pay you back as soon as I got the trust fund money. There is no trust fund money, Malik cut in his sharp voice, instantly silencing their pathetic infighting. The money my biological father left me was invested directly into a private corporate holding company when I was a toddler. My mother built that holding company into a massive financial weapon over the last 18 years. I do not have a simple savings account, Dion. I am the primary shareholder of a predatory debt acquisition firm. Malik closed the dossier and let it drop onto the table. And yesterday afternoon, my holding company purchased every single piece of your fraudulent commercial debt. We bought the loans you defaulted on. We bought the promissory notes from your angry private investors. We acquired your failing business assets for absolutely pennies on the dollar. Malik turned his piercing gaze toward Richard and Brenda. And we also purchased the secondary mortgage on your sprawling colonial mansion. The bank was going to auction it off next week. We stepped in and bought the deed. The realization hit my father like a physical blow to the chest. He staggered backward, falling heavily into his leather chair. The arrogant, commanding patriarch was entirely gone, replaced by a broken, terrified old man facing total ruin. His face turned a deep, alarming shade of purple. He looked at me and then looked at Malik, his hands shaking violently. "You cannot do this," Richard gasped, clutching his chest. "This is my home. I worked my entire life for that house. You have to give it back to me. I demand respect. I am your grandfather Malik. I am your family. You cannot throw your own family onto the street." Malik did not flinch. He did not show a single ounce of sympathy. He walked around the edge of the mahogany table, stopping just a few feet away from the man who had ordered my destruction 19 years ago. "You threw my mother out into the freezing rain when she was carrying me," Malik said, his voice dropping to a low, terrifying register. "You told her she was a disease. You called me a reputation-ruining mistake. You locked the door and left us to die on the street because you cared more about your country club friends than your own flesh and blood." Malik leaned forward, resting his hands on the armrests of Richard's chair, trapping my father in his seat. "I am not your family, Richard. I am the chief executive officer of the firm that owns your debt. I am your landlord, and I am officially terminating your residency. You have exactly 48 hours to vacate my property before I send the county sheriff to forcibly remove you and throw your garbage bags onto the driveway." The sheer magnitude of the devastation finally fractured the last remaining shred of my father's arrogant facade. Richard opened his mouth to shout another command, but no words came out. He simply slumped back in his heavy leather chair, staring blankly at the polished mahogany table, as if the wood had suddenly caught fire. Brenda let out a loud, piercing wail. It was not the calculated, theatrical sobbing she had deployed in the lobby of my restaurant. This was the raw, ugly sound of a woman realizing her entire universe of lies had just violently collapsed on top of her. Dion practically threw himself across the table toward my legal team, his eyes wild with absolute terror. "You cannot send that footage to the police," he begged, his voice cracking as the reality of federal prison closed around his throat. "I will withdraw the conservatorship. I will sign whatever you want. Just please do not give them the ledger. I have people looking for me. If I go to jail, I am a dead man." Kendra turned on him with the viciousness of a cornered rattlesnake. She grabbed his arm, her acrylic nails digging into his expensive suit jacket. "You told me this was foolproof," Kendra shrieked, her face twisted in pure hatred. "You told me you had the properties. You told me you were a millionaire. You dragged me into a federal crime, you pathetic lying fraud. You ruined my life." They began screaming at each other right there in the middle of the executive boardroom. Brenda was crying hysterically, clutching her chest. Richard was shouting at Dion, demanding his house back. Kendra was hitting her husband on the shoulder, cursing him for bankrupting her parents. The pristine, quiet atmosphere of the private wealth management center was completely shattered by their toxic, chaotic implosion. I did not raise my voice. I did not hurl insults or demand apologies. I simply looked at Harrison and gave him a single sharp nod. Harrison silently gathered the thick black dossiers and slid them back into his leather briefcase, snapping the brass locks shut. My two other corporate litigators did the same. Malik buttoned his suit jacket, adjusting his cuffs with perfect, unbothered precision. We turned our backs on the screaming, desperate people at the table and walked toward the heavy glass doors. "Jada, wait!" Brenda screamed, stumbling out of her chair and reaching her hand toward me. "You cannot leave us like this. We are your family." I paused at the door. I looked over my shoulder, looking at the woman who had spent 19 years trying to convince me I was nothing. "Family protects each other, Brenda," I said, my voice steady and cold. "You are just a group of parasites who finally ran out of blood to drain. Enjoy your new reality." I pushed the glass doors open and stepped out into the quiet marble corridor. Malik and my legal team followed right behind me. The heavy doors swung shut completely, muffling the sounds of their screaming. We walked into the private elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. As the elevator descended smoothly toward the lobby, nobody said a word. The silence was not heavy or tense. It was the lightest, most beautiful silence I had ever experienced in my entire life. The aftermath of that meeting was swift and absolutely brutal. I did not have to lift another finger to destroy them. The legal machinery I had set in motion executed the final blows with terrifying efficiency. Exactly 3 weeks later, Dion was arrested. My legal team had forwarded his complete financial portfolio, along with the high-definition security footage of his commercial burglary, directly to the Internal Revenue Service and the federal banking authorities. Federal agents raided his rented mailbox and his leased luxury vehicle. They led him out of a cheap motel room in handcuffs while local news cameras rolled. His fraudulent shell company was completely dismantled. The dangerous offshore creditors he owed money to immediately began seizing whatever invisible assets he had left. He was denied bail due to his severe flight risk, and he is currently sitting in a federal penitentiary awaiting trial for wire fraud, grand theft, and extortion. He is looking at 20 years behind bars. My parents' fate was equally poetic. The 48-hour eviction notice Malik had delivered was not a bluff. When the deadline expired, Richard and Brenda refused to leave the sprawling brick colonial mansion they had occupied for 3 decades. They stubbornly believed they could somehow manipulate the system one last time. So my holding company sent the county sheriff. Neighbors from their elite country club stood on their manicured lawns and watched in absolute shock as law enforcement officers forcibly removed my parents from the property. The sheriff deputies carried their faux designer furniture, their outdated clothes, and their cheap costume jewelry out the front door and dumped it directly onto the wet driveway. It was a perfect mirror image of the night they threw me out into the rain. They had absolutely nowhere to go. With their credit completely destroyed and their bank accounts frozen, they were forced to move into a cramped, poorly lit, one-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city. The country club friends Brenda had tried to impress completely abandoned her the moment she lost her wealth. And then there was Kendra. The golden child who had built her entire identity on being superior to me found herself entirely broke and publicly humiliated. Without Dion fraudulent money to fund her lavish lifestyle, her fake reality shattered. She immediately filed for divorce, abandoning her husband the moment he was arrested. But Kendra did not learn humility. Instead, she turned her lifelong viciousness entirely onto our parents. She moved into the cramped one-bedroom apartment with Brenda and Richard, and the three of them began eating each other alive. Kendra spends her days screaming at my mother, blaming Brenda for pushing her into a sham marriage and ruining her perfect life. They are trapped together in a tiny, miserable box, forever suffocating on the very toxicity they used to poison everyone else. 6 months have passed since that morning in the bank boardroom. I am standing on the expansive glass balcony of my downtown penthouse, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water. The sun is setting over the Atlanta skyline, casting a brilliant array of deep oranges and vibrant purples across the towering glass skyscrapers. The city below is a chaotic web of traffic and noise, but up here the air is cool, clean, and perfectly still. Malik steps out onto the balcony holding a cup of hot tea. He leans against the glass railing, standing shoulder to shoulder with me. He just finished his final exams for the semester, scoring at the absolute top of his corporate law class. He looks out over the city completely at peace. We do not need to speak. The quiet moment we share is built on a foundation of absolute, unbreakable trust. I look at my son and I feel a profound, overwhelming sense of freedom. True freedom is not just about having $40 million in the bank. True freedom is the complete severance of the emotional chains that tie you to the people who want to see you fail. For 19 years, I allowed the ghost of my family rejection to haunt the edges of my success. I pushed myself to the brink of exhaustion, building my culinary empire, because deep down, a small, terrified part of me still wanted to prove to them that I was worthy of a seat at their table. I thought that if I became wealthy enough, powerful enough, or successful enough, they would finally look at me and apologize. But looking down at the city tonight, I finally understand the truth. You cannot negotiate your worth with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. They tried to bury me when I was 16. They threw me out into a thunderstorm, expecting me to freeze, expecting me to fail, expecting me to become a tragic cautionary tale they could use to make themselves feel superior. But they did not realize they were not burying a mistake. They were planting a seed. Every insult, every slammed door, every moment of cruel rejection was just soil forcing me to push harder, to grow deeper roots, and to reach for the light on my own terms. I did not just survive their cruelty. I used it as the blueprint to build an absolute fortress. I stopped begging for a seat at their toxic table, and I built my own damn dining room. If you are listening to this right now and you are carrying the heavy, agonizing weight of family rejection, I need you to hear me clearly. The people who share your blood do not own your destiny. You do not owe your success, your peace, or your children to people who only treat you like family when they need something from you. Your worth is not determined by the people who broke you. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your own peace? Have you ever had to build your own empire in absolute silence while everyone around you doubted your strength? Tell me exactly how you took your power back in the comments below. I read every single one. If my journey gave you hope today, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who might be sitting in the dark right now, wondering if they are strong enough to walk away from the people hurting them. Remind them that they are. You get to write the ending to your own story. You get to choose who stands on your balcony. And never forget, the absolute most beautiful revenge you can ever achieve is massive, unapologetic peace.